provide some support like they did for this commercial paper facility, and then through perhaps a small business administration or through another institution, get money out to small and medium-sized businesses that might be finding it difficult to access that credit. There'd be a parallel to what they're doing now for the commercial paper market, which tends to be medium to large-sized business. In principle, they could do it for small and medium-sized business.
Randy, when people ask you if the Fed has learned lessons from 08 or 09 and the degree to which they are implementing those hard-earned lessons now, what do you say?
I think they're doing their best. I mean, I think they tried to be proactive and reduced interest rates and an intermeeting meeting or between the regular meeting, and then they reduced rates down to zero, or effectively to zero, before the actual meeting itself, providing $1.5 trillion worth of liquidity into the markets over a longer term than is typical. So rather than just overnight or 1 week, for longer, which is exactly what we did during the financial crisis, to extend the maturity, because people are worried about institutions existing not just tomorrow, but a few months hence. Reviving the international provision of dollar liquidity through central banks around the world. And so I think they're taking the lessons out of the playbook. I think they've learned a number of things to be able to do these quickly, proactively. And then my guess is we'll see some new things, perhaps along the lines of what I was describing.
Randy, obviously, hey, Randy. So the Fed has invoked the financial crisis playbook, utilized some of the same tools, and obviously is attentive to the way you can have these kind of unforeseen effects of, going after parts of the economy that aren't directly impacted by the crisis. But I'm wondering, are you personally surprised that the liquidity has essentially dried up in all these areas so quickly under stress?
Guys?
Unfortunately, I think this is, when people get scared, what do they want? They want safe liquid assets. So they're going to run right to those. And so it's no surprise that in a highly uncertain and volatile environment, they would want that. But I do think that there have been some unintended consequences of some of the rules that have been put in post-crisis. People were trying to make the system more resilient, and so I think the motivations were very sound and very solid. But the interactions of some of the liquidity requirements, capital requirements, and some of the restrictions from the Volcker rule on making markets have made this a little bit more fragile than a little bit more deep. I think we'll be able to draw some lessons on reforming some of those regulations down the line. Right now, that's something we'll worry about later. Right now, we've got to get the liquidity into the markets, and the Fed is doing its darndest.
Well, they got to pair this with something else. This is just a place to bring your good paper.
Yes, and you have to have the paper. That's right, and so that's why this is what the Fed can do is necessary but not sufficient, as a number of you have said before. In 2008, 2009. There was a scramble for dollar liquidity. The main problems were in the financial markets and the financial institutions themselves. Here, and there, the Fed had the tools to directly address that. Here, it's related to the virus. So it's related to broken supply chains. It's related to restrictions that make people unable to either get out to buy things or to get out to work. There's no Fed policy that can possibly directly address that. And so that's where the health authorities and fiscal authorities have to come in.
Although, Randy, I have to imagine that somewhere deep within the closets of the Fed, there was a playbook that asked the question, what would happen if a global biological event took place? And that book is clearly being opened. I mean, I would assume there is some level of emergency planning that is now relevant and being enacted because of this.
Oh, of course. But as I said, with something like this, the shock is coming from outside the financial system, the Fed can't directly solve it. They can directly solve liquidity problems, and they're trying to do that. And in 2008, 2009, that was a large source of the problem. Here, the source of the problem is something that is far outside of what the Fed can directly do, and so they can provide a foundation for recovery, to try to find a foundation for preventing things from going too far south. But it's the health authorities and fiscal authorities that have to act. On top of that, the Fed can't cure the virus. The Fed can't repair broken supply chains.
Steve?
Hey, guys. Yeah, hey, Carl, thanks. I wonder if Randy could stick around because as I've reported this issue here, I think there's a problem we're not recognizing here that perhaps this facility will not address. Obviously, this does need to be done because commercial paper is gummed up. Let's be clear, the Federal Reserve is taking A1, P1 paper, is taking the highest quality paper. This is very different from the financial crisis, where the financial crisis created economic problems. And by solving the financial problems, you got rid of the economic ones. This is one where a coronavirus with self-isolation is creating economic problems. And that undermines the paper, perhaps, that could be brought to this facility. So I just want to throw at Randy. Randy, I don't know exactly how the Fed solves this problem, but again, the Fed protects itself by accepting only good paper. What if the paper is not money good? What if there's a problem with the paper itself, or that there's a vast need for issuance below investment grade or the highest quality paper, Randy?
No, for sure. So the Federal Reserve Act requires that the
Good things
This one shouldn't take long.
Like Renault,
Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there.
You getting
Then
an
the
extra
chain of that wheel
£500
would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
UK/Top Gear event. Renault Finance Clio Play SE 75, 37 months, £500 deposit, optional final payment 6531. Order by March 31st. Participating dealers, the first of 5 years or 100,000 miles. T's and C's apply.
in order to do it. That wasn't the case before, as well as if they're going to go into these other areas, they because of the
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
On average, in London, a scooter or motorbike is stolen every hour. Make sure it's not yours. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
The big B&Q Flooring and Tiles event is now on. Get a show-stopping 4 for 3 on a huge range of laminate flooring and tiles. So for an unmissable deal, hurry to B&Q. You can do it when you B&Q it. The value of every fourth item per single transaction in descending price order will be deducted. Offer ends 30th of March, subject to availability. See DIY.com.
We Brits know how to roll our sleeves up. We know how to keep calm and carry on. We also know a great offer when we see one. Like the all-new Vauxhall Corsa with 0 deposit and 0% interest. So, you know what to do. Search Corsa offer. Come off the offer, come off the hour. Vauxhall. New rules Britannia. Personal contract purchase on selected new Vauxhall Corsas. Subject to status, terms and conditions apply. 18 plus, Vauxhall Finance. Offer ends 31st of March.
Come on the Bloomberg Business app and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
Where's your views on the municipal bond landscape?
The market does not like uncertainty, does not react well to uncertainty.
There's a whole lot of optimism around the valuation of Uber.
What is Ford saying about the self-driving car?
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
Maybe we're getting hooked on debt and low interest rates.
The black hole called power could be a bigger black hole.
Only buy IPO stock that you can't get. If you can get it, it's probably a dog you don't want it.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Coming up on Bloomberg Markets, we'll take a look at the latest fiscal spending plans to counter the effects of the coronavirus, and we'll game out just how much that could support the economy. Also, we speak with former acting administrator for Medicare and Medicaid services on advising Americans to stay home and the progress of the virus as it forces a lot of people to socially distance themselves. Right now, though, let's head over to John Tucker and get some numbers. John.
All right, thanks a lot, Lisa. We are in the green for the major. Average is kind of whipsawing throughout the day. Here's one number that stands out, the VIX. It is right now at 77, so that is starting to ease this fear gauge just a little. Down in percentage terms, about 6% right now. Stocks are rising after we had the worst session since 1987 yesterday on the news that the Federal Reserve is going to restart the financial crisis era program that helps companies borrow through the commercial paper market. Now, that market did come under pretty considerable strain because of the pandemic. Companies will typically tap the commercial paper market to pay their day-to-day operations. We have right now the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 134 points. That's up 0.6%. We're at 20,300. Earlier in the day, we did dip below 20,000. The S&P 500 right now up 56 points. That's a rise of 2.3% at 2441. The Nasdaq Composite Index is up 165 points, a rise of 2.4% at 7,071. There is evidence the housing market poised to slow as the outbreak intensifies. That story from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The home builder confidence index is down for the third month in a row after setting a two-decade high at the end of last year. The data signal the sales outlook is dimming. Roughly a quarter of builders report the virus outbreak is causing supply bottlenecks. Wednesday, the government issues data on February housing starts. Economists see a slowdown. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Now we're seeing bonds being sold off to some extent. The benchmark, the 10-year, the yield right now is up 5 basis points. We're at 0.76. The yield, the 10-year, the 2-year, 0.36%. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Stocks being whipped around. We had limit up futures. Now we're just up slightly. Let's get a sense of what the action is in the world of small caps. To do that, we welcome Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson. Dave, what are you looking at?
Well, we've certainly seen some volatility in the Russell 2000 index. At one point, it was up about 2%. At another point, it was down about 2.5%. At the moment, it's lower, down by 0.6%. Compare that with the S&P 500's gain of 2.5%, and smaller companies are clearly being harder hit. The Russell's steepest decline belongs to GNC Holdings, whose ticker is also GNC. The seller of nutritional supplements has fallen 56.5%. It's trading at less than 47 cents a share. GNC said it doesn't expect to have enough cash for payments due on bonds and a bank loan. Now, restaurant stocks in the Russell are tumbling as the coronavirus outbreak leads to shutdowns of dining rooms. Outback Steakhouse owner Bloomin' Brands, ticker BLMN, is down almost 32%. Chili's owner Brinker International, ticker EAT, is down almost 28%, and Jack in the Box, ticker Jack, is down 20%. Now, one of the Russell's biggest gains belongs to Spoke Holdings, whose first name is its ticker, SPOK. The wireless services provider has climbed 30.5%. B. Riley Financial made a buyout offer valued at $227 million. And Blueprint Medicines, ticker BPMC, has gained 20%. The drug developers raised the equivalent of buy from hold at RBC Capital Markets.
Thank you so much, Dave Wilson, Bloomberg Stocks editor, for the rundown. Let's shift gears from the stock market to what we know about the economy. There was a story today on the Bloomberg saying that Wall Street basically are saying to fiscal policymakers, whatever number you're coming up with for that policy that you're making, double it, and that might be a start. In the meantime, we did get some data, retail sales in particular, earlier today. Yelena Shulyetyeva is a senior U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics, joining us now by phone. And Yelena, I'd love to get your sense. It seems like
Lisa, first of all, actually, right now we have the governor of Virginia speaking. Let's get some sense of what he's saying right now.
Parties tonight. If you do, you are literally putting others at risk. We will get through this, but everyone must use good sense and good judgment. Today, we are announcing the following things. First, Virginia will follow the federal guidelines regarding gatherings of 10 or more people. As a doctor, I understand that this virus spreads through human-to-human contact. Droplets from sneezes or coughing if people are too close, or they can be left on objects like door handles and our cell phones. That's why it's so important that people stay away from close contact. Second, we strongly urge those aged 65 and over to self-quarantine. Please protect yourselves. It is important that we make sure older Virginians in this situation can still get food, medicine, and other needs met. Our state agencies, our food banks, faith-based groups, and other nutrition-based organizations are working hard to coordinate food services. This may look different in different communities, but everyone who needs food assistance will be able to get it. I also urge everyone to make sure you check on that older neighbor or your parents or grandparents. Help people out with grocery deliveries. Make sure that they're okay. Again, we all have a responsibility to one another. We understand that the 10-person standard will have an impact on a number of businesses across our society. It means that all restaurants, malls, fitness centers, and theaters must significantly reduce their capacity in compliance with this 10-person standard or close. Restaurants are encouraged to continue takeout options. I understand that this affects people's livelihoods. We are taking the following actions to help our workers. Because Virginia and the federal government have declared states of emergency, unemployment funds are available through the Virginia Employment Commission to help mitigate the impact on employees of these businesses as well as on the businesses themselves. We have waived the 1-week waiting period so workers can start receiving benefits right away. We know that rent and other bills won't wait. Affected workers and businesses can contact the Virginia Employment Commission for information on how to apply for help. Today, I am ordering that Virginia's 75 Department of Motor Vehicles offices close to the public. Online services will still be available, and we encourage anyone who needs to renew their license or vehicle registration and can do it online to please do so. For those whose licenses or registrations expire May 15th, we will grant a 60-day extension. People need to do the right thing. Everyone has a role to help mitigate the spread of this disease, of this virus. That starts with social distancing. It is critical that we all think not of ourselves at this time, but of others. Young and healthy people may think this won't affect them, but I hope they will think of their parents and their grandparents. And I urge everyone to think of their neighbors, their communities. Public health relies on every individual making responsible decisions. We all have a responsibility to each other. We can and will get through this difficult time, but we must work together to do so. Now we will hear from Virginia Health Commissioner Dr. Norm Oliver. Dr. Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor said, we currently have 67 cases of COVID-19 in the Commonwealth.
To, Governor Ralph Northam.
Since yesterday, that's an additional 7 new cases. And we are expecting results on about 48 other tests that are pending in our state lab right now. And there are tests that have been taken and are being run by LabCorp, Quest, and other private laboratories. So that number will increase. The Virginia Department of Health will be posting at noon each day the numbers that we have in the morning. So that would be one way to check this. And in addition, of course, there will be these daily news briefings by the governor. Among the cases that have occurred since yesterday is one case in a long-term care facility. And this is very concerning. This is our first case in a skilled nursing facility, and we are actively investigating this case, working in collaboration with this long-term care facility to isolate and make sure that the infection does not spread to others. The breakdown of those cases, the 67 cases are 9 in Central Region, 18 in Eastern Region, 38 in the Northern Region, 4 in Northeast. We still have no cases yet in Southwest. While the majority of the non-travel related cases are cases that have been associated with other known cases, that is very local transmission, we have now begun to observe cases with no known exposure to a case which is what we would classify as community transmission or community spread. So the likelihood of community spread is definitely there. Some local transmission, such as in the Peninsula Health District, has resulted in clusters of illness, which reinforces the importance of what the governor has talked about already, which is the social distancing. I would like to say also, for those young folks who think that they're not affected by this, I want to underscore what the governor said about how social distancing on your part will protect our elderly. It's also important to know that although 80% of those who get COVID-19 have mild disease, that statistic comes from looking at the pandemic in China. And everything that was listed as mild was everything other than the severe disease. So included in the mild category is some pretty bad pneumonia. I don't want you to think that you're just going to get a cold. Okay? This is a serious pandemic, and social distancing is therefore something that we all should do and take seriously for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for the entire community. We currently have testing capacity of about 300 to 400 tests. We have on order and will be receiving today more test kits, which should nearly double that amount of tests. Private companies are online to help us with the testing, and many of you heard from the federal government of plans to launch automated testing and drive-through test sites around the country. The first wave of that will occur in those areas that have been hardest hit, like Washington State and California. But Virginia is in that next phase that should get those tests from the federal government. So we will be ramping up our testing capabilities in the days and weeks ahead.
Okay, we've been listening to officials in Virginia holding a briefing on the coronavirus, including the governor of the state of Virginia, Ralph Northam, as they try to get ahead of this. Let's bring in Nathan Hager of Bloomberg News in our Washington, D.C. office. Nathan, give us a sense of what's going on in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in the general kind of D.C. area.
Well, as we heard from those officials, Paul, the Commonwealth of Virginia is dealing with coronavirus cases throughout the state. Only one region of the state, the South Side, it has yet to report any cases, but the Washington region has been dealing with this outbreak for quite some time. Maryland Governor Larry Hogan had already issued a state of emergency, I believe, more than a week ago, along with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, before President Trump shifted his tone yesterday on this pandemic. Virginia had already reported 2 deaths, along with the 67 cases that they just announced with their latest numbers. And as Governor Northam has been speaking in Richmond, the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, has been updating people in his state as well. He just announced that the April 28th presidential primary that was supposed to be held next month is now being postponed until the latest possible date of June 2nd because of the pandemic. So the developments continue here in the Washington region, Paul.
Nathan Hager, I'll pick it up from there. Thank you so much, and stay safe over there. We'll look forward to your further reports on this. There is a question. I want to go back to a statistic that really stood out to me, and it was a little bit alarming, and it's gotten a bunch of pushback given the lack of testing. Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York State, saying the hospitalization rate for the coronavirus in New York State is 15 to 19%. He was arguing for more capacity for hospital beds, for ventilators, and he was talking about the incredible strain it's going to put on the healthcare system in the United States. Joining us now is Andy Slavitt, former acting administrator for Medicare and Medicaid services. No one better to have a frontline view on exactly how strained this could potentially be. Andy, I want to first get your thoughts on that 15 to 19% hospitalization rate. People are pushing back and saying that's sensational, considering the fact that so many people haven't been tested. Do you think that it is an accurate reflection of just how dire this virus is when it does affect people and they do develop symptoms?
So everybody's going to be hearing all sorts of data, and we should all appreciate the fact that this is a novel virus. It hasn't been with us for that long, and every data, a piece of data is only a data point. And so over time, we'll have, I think, reliable forms of data. But as you listen to this data, I think we should be closer to, I wouldn't say anybody should panic, but we should be closer to panic than we should be to calm. On the scale of 1 to 10, we should be at an 8. We shouldn't be. So I tend to say every piece of data that I see, I want to understand it and assume the challenges until proven otherwise. Because in this environment where we have no immune system for this virus, where a number of people have underlying medical conditions, where we have a number of seniors to whom this is a lethal condition, better to be safe. And if we're wrong, and if the 18% turns out to be 10%, hallelujah. Someone can go back and criticize the people who said 18% later, but I certainly would rather behave on the much more cautious side.
So, Andy, just broadly defined, can you give us your sense of kind of how you think our U.S. healthcare system is prepared for what could be a surge in patients from this virus?
So we're not prepared, but let me put that in context. That expression, they didn't build a church for Easter Sunday, is one that comes to mind. If we built hospitals in New York 8 times the size, then we would be, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But there are places where we should be better prepared. Things like surge capacity, the ability to bring hospitals, ships, equipment, safety gear. We should have had much higher stockpiles of that. I will tell you that those recommendations have been strongly made in certain quarters for a long, long time, and I think dismissed candidly by this administration. Although I'm not trying to take a shot at them, I think it's just a fact. But I will also tell you that even if we had prepared, I still believe, even if we were better prepared, the scope of the virus is such that I think we still would have been overwhelmed. So we're going to see a lot of parts of our hospital system under strain, most particularly the people who work in the healthcare system on the front line, who I think are going to end up being our real heroes in all of this, because they are going to be operating often without a playbook, seeing a lot of things that are contagious, without the best protective gear at times, because our supplies are running low, and they're going to be overwhelmed. And it's that group of people that I think we really have to demonstrate an immense amount of gratitude for, because they're really going to be the ones that are going to have to help us get through this.
Andy, one other thing that Governor Cuomo said was that he expects the virus to peak in New York State in 45 days, which seems like quite a long time from now for it to peak. Can you give us a sense of, if that is the case, what the scope of cases could potentially be, and whether asking Americans to stay home actually will help alleviate that, or at least mitigate that?
So it's really interesting. You all, of course, have heard all of these the expression "flatten the curve."
Yeah.
Right. All of America is becoming familiar with that expression.
Hashtag flatten the curve. Yeah, it's trending. Yes.
Exactly. Right. It's trending and it's trendy. Maybe there should be a clothing line called "Flattening Your Curves" or something. But
Lord.
Oh Lord, exactly. We're going to go all kinds of fun places with this virus. We're going to have some humor, in my opinion. But the truth is, the implication of that means we would rather it actually take longer than have it shorter. And I know that that's a weird thing to get our hands around, because that means that the social disruption, the economic disruption will go on for longer. But if we socially isolate, we will reduce the number of cases, to your prior question, that the healthcare system has to handle. But it will also mean that this is going to go on for a longer period of time, and we should be okay with that, because we will be able to build immunity to the virus, eventually have some herd immunity, eventually have some drugs that can combat it. But it will only work. The only way it works is if people socially isolate, and I hate that expression. Because I don't want people to socially isolate. I want people to physically isolate. But it only works if people hashtag stay home. Or if you prefer, stay the F home, as I've seen trending on Twitter. That's the most important thing people can do right now.
Andy, how about the testing? Where are we in terms of getting test kits broadly disseminated across the country, so we can really start getting accurate count as to the scope of this?
Well, candidly, we're well behind where we should be. We had our first case the same day as South Korea, and their tests were available 10 days prior to that first test, and we're roughly a month or more behind where we need to be. And now I believe we're doing all of the right things to ramp up production. I think you'll see production double and tests double across the country this week, and I think that's a good thing. We'll still be well short if you look at on a per capita basis for the rest of the world. We'll still be in last place. And then I will say this: we will see. I suspect we'll see a bump, but our supply chain, the things that allow us to do these tests, because it's not just a swab. There's a bunch of things you need in the lab, reagents and machines and so forth. Those supplies are in demand across the world. And there's only so many of them, and they can only be made so fast. So I suspect we will have a surge in tests, and that'll be good news. But I think they will then become in short supply again.
Andy, just talking about hashtag flatten the curve and hashtag stay the F home, and all the sort of social media presence, there's sort of gallows humor out there, people coming up with innovative ways to pass the time in their homes as they isolate. But there's also talk about a rise in anxiety and a rise in sort of this feeling of fear. And you said, on the scale from panic to panic. How can you give people a sense of, well, perhaps if people take it really seriously, it won't have to be the catastrophe that you're saying?
Yeah. Well, look, this will end. This will end. We will get through this. And we will have a period in our lives that we'll always look back on. That will be, will it be 45 days? Will it be 90 days? Will it be underneath history? We don't know that now, but we'll know that. And we will always look back on it. So it will be over. we should just be thinking about this as every life lost, just like every life lost to the flu or a heart condition, we should try to prevent. So that means some sacrifice. That means staying in. That means doing some things differently. That means, and with that comes some anxiety, financial anxiety, social anxiety, all of those things. And it's okay to feel those things because the future's uncertain while we're in it.
Right.
But we will get through this. And I would also say, let's stop talking just about what we can't do. Let's start talking about what we can do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff we can do.
Andy, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I could speak with you all afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Andy Slavitt, former acting administrator for Medicare and Medicaid Services, talking about the situation facing the healthcare sector. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks are moving higher as the Federal Reserve unleashed another weapon to keep the financial markets functioning. The central bank has restarted a program to help companies borrow money and relieve the strain in the market. Amazon.com is prioritizing the stocking and shipping of household staples and medical supplies. The company has been struggling to deal with the surge in demand for online orders from customers avoiding stores during the coronavirus pandemic. American Express said it can no longer forecast full-year results on the spread of the coronavirus and warned that first-quarter profit would be lower than analysts' estimates. The virus has sparked a slowdown in travel and entertainment expenses. And the two largest theater chains will close all of their locations starting today. That's following pressure from government officials to limit public gatherings. AMC said its movie halls will be closed 6 to 12 weeks. Regal said its theaters will be shut indefinitely. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
Jelly. Jelly adjective. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
What if you could keep the top economic experts in a conference room next to your office without having to feed them?
Do we need better optics? Do we need some substance? Do CEOs care about ESG?
We have seen quite a lot of stimulus pumped into the system already.
It's the biggest warning yet about the financial risks of climate change.
Now there are more ways to hear us. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and at BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Apply by the 31st of March for a chance to win your first year in halls. Visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
In the left passenger seat, we've got Dan the Widowmaker. In the right, Face Smash Steve. Oh, a solid left hook from Steve. Blocked by Dan. Dan's got him up against the ropes. Going for a signature pile driver slam. But Steve's wriggled away like a greasy snake. And Steve's got him in a chokehold. He's got him! He's got him!
Boys, pack it in back there. I'm trying to drive.
Sorry. Your mate's more likely to crash with passengers in the car. So don't drive him to distraction. Let a mate concentrate.
The big B&Q Flooring and Tiles event is now on. Get a show-stopping 4 for 3 on a huge range of laminate flooring and tiles. So for an unmissable deal, hurry to B&Q. You can do it when you B&Q it. The value of every fourth item per single transaction in descending price order will be deducted. Offer ends 30th of March, subject to availability. See DIY.com.
Make life easy with Sky TV and Netflix all in one place on Sky Q. Discover Sky originals like Intelligence.
I think we can learn a lot from each other.
Right next to Netflix originals like You.
It's nice to meet you, love.
Find them all side by side on Sky Q. So, get Sky Ultimate TV for just £25 a month. Easy. Visit sky.com and join today. Ends April 30th. Prices may change. 18-month minimum term on Sky Signature. Set up £20 requires Sky Q connected to broadband. Correct at March 13th. Terms apply.
The moment you realise you've drilled through an electric cable. The moment you realise that doesn't just mean no telly on the wall, but no telly full stop. The The moment you realise you've got British Gas Home Care. And not just your electrics, but your plumbing, heating and drains are all covered. So the moment you've got a problem, make it our problem. British Gas, here to solve. Search British Gas Home Care.
Hey, big ears.
What?
Have you heard?
What?
Ford are offering £20 off a spring service.
You what?
That's right. £20 off when you book online using code FORD20. Problem is...
What?
We're rabbits.
Book now at Ford.co.uk or search Ford Service. Retail customers at participating Ford dealers. Cannot be used with other Ford service promotions. Only one voucher per customer per booking.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll talk with the author of a fictional story about a global pandemic that right now feels all too real.
All I did was just drew upon the trends. I just extended them. Unfortunately, real life seems to have outraced even some of my imagination.
Lawrence Wright joins me on the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Listen to this episode on TuneIn today.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, we'll take a look at how the coronavirus is impacting M&A and supply chains. Plus, we'll have Eddie Perkin, Chief Equity Strategist at Eaton Vance, joining us to give us his thoughts on the markets. But first, let's go to John Tucker of Bloomberg News for a Bloomberg Business Flash. John, what do you have?
And Lisa, another dramatic move by the Fed, giving a lift to stocks for the major averages at session highs. Right now, the central bank is going to restart a financial crisis hero program to help companies borrow through what's called the commercial paper market after the coronavirus outbreak caused real strains in the commercial paper market, which is typically a safe haven. Now, the Fed's going to use the new commercial paper funding facility to buy commercial paper from eligible businesses. The Treasury will provide about $10 billion of credit protection from its rainy day account, which we call the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So, as I say, giving a lift to equities right now. The Dow up 599 points. That's up about 3%. The S&P 500, 110 points higher. That's up 4.6%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 325 points. That's a rise of 4.7%. Now, if you want to look to China as an example of the impact from an economy from coronavirus, Bloomberg Economics is tentatively lowering China's first quarter GDP forecast to negative 11% year on year. Notably down from the previous 1.2% call. That is an extraordinary number. The abrupt pullback from bonds has led investors to dump securities to raise cash. Right now, the 10-year yield is up 11 basis points, 0.83%. The price is down by a full point. Price down, yields up. And as we look at where is that money going, into the U.S. dollar, the ultimate safe haven. We have the euro down about 1.9%, the Japanese yen 1.6% lower, and we check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa and Paul.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. We are talking about China. That's one thing John mentioned, that Bloomberg Economics just downgraded its expectations for the growth. And it's not that surprising given the dismal numbers we got over the weekend out of China, which raises a question about supply chains and just getting the materials that companies in the United States and elsewhere in the world need in order to produce and sell their products. Joining us now, Gaurang Shastri, Managing Director, Mergers and Acquisitions in business services focused on logistics and transportation for Lincoln International. Gaurang, I'd love to start with just how vast the disruption has been given the shutdowns that we saw in China earlier this year. How disruptive has that been to the supply chain?
Sure, and it's certainly had a profound impact on the global supply chain here, in particular in the first few months of the year, and certainly remains an evolving and dynamic situation here. It really did start over worries about sourcing product from China as they were forced to shut down production, particularly here in the U.S., as many of our manufacturers have a significant amount of exposure to Chinese production. In fact, 15% of the Fortune 100 companies have Tier 1 suppliers that are supplying parts directly into the U.S. manufacturing process. And, even more worrisome is virtually all of the Fortune 100 companies are sourcing or have Tier 2 suppliers, all based in affected areas of China. I think, at least for the first couple of months of the year, most U.S. companies were able to get by here with a lot of the buffer stock that they had pre-bought in anticipation of a slowdown that typically occurs with the Chinese New Year. I think what's been a little bit more worrisome is that as China came back from the holidays here, there's been some challenges really over the past few weeks to really get goods out of the country. So production is starting to slowly restart in the country, but they're having challenges finding truck drivers and getting through a lot of the heightened levels of screening that are required to get these products overseas. And certainly it's not just those suppliers and manufacturers that are looking for finished goods from China, but also those that are sourcing components that are required in production. So now worries are over what does future production capacity look like here in the U.S. as well as globally here if you can't get certain critical components that you're sourcing from China. So I think this has really highlighted the fact for many companies that were already re-examining their supply chains given the trade wars, do we need to figure out alternate supplies outside of China, going to other countries like Vietnam, or in Europe going more near sourcing to Eastern Europe, or even in the U.S. reigniting efforts to source product from Mexico. So I think this will only heighten the level of attention that's being put on making sure you have redundancy in the supply chain and moving away from the reliance in China.
So, Gaurang, how about here in the U.S.? It's very early days of kind of this country kind of coming to grips with the virus and shutting down in certain cities. Give us a sense of kind of how the logistics set up here in the U.S. may play out. I'm thinking of trucking companies, railroads. What's the status there?
Sure, and I think, fortunately, thus far we have been fairly resilient here, and I think there's been a lot of panic in terms of going out there and stocking up inventories, in terms of household goods. But I think the longer-term worry here is if this is more pervasive, it's going to have an impact on unemployment here. If you look at the ports on the West Coast, for example, at the port of Long Beach here, if we start to see a prolonged shutdown, there's going to be millions of jobs at risk here if there's less cargo that's coming across through those ports. We've had 14 months of consecutive declines in the shipments that are coming in from overseas, and that is going to continue here for most estimates here. And what that means is, as many as 1 out of 9 people that are kind of in those jobs at the ports will potentially lose their jobs here. But then thinking about some of the more critical supply chains that we need, including pharmaceuticals and other electronics that may be going into healthcare equipment, I think there's heightened efforts here in the U.S. to make sure that those supply chains remain unimpacted here. So we are optimistic that that will be the case here, and certainly it's getting a lot more attention than it was getting here 3 or 4 weeks ago when everyone's attention was just on, can we get product out of China? Now it's really, let's make sure our domestic supply chains remain intact as well.
Gaurang Shastri, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your thoughts. Gaurang is a managing director and head of Lincoln International's North American Logistics and Transportation business here, really getting a sense here of the global logistic issues, which, I think manufacturers, lease, and shippers have been dealing with for a long time as it relates to China.
Yeah.
Now have to start maybe looking a little bit more, other areas within the continental U.S., for example, certainly some logistical challenges to be managed.
And there's a larger question here about what this does longer term. In other words, this isn't necessarily going to be viewed as a once-off type of event. I mean, certainly a once-in-a-century kind of event, but the whole concept of disrupting supply chains might accelerate a push away from sort of the globalization and the wave that we saw of that over a long period of time. Kind of a long-standing question that people have is how much is behavior going to shift of both corporations and individuals after this episode, this disruption is over?
Yeah, absolutely. There's many layers to this, and as you were suggesting, it's I think it'll be influenced largely by how long this really takes, and how much will consumers' behavior and companies' behavior really need to change going forward. We do have green on the screen, still holding on to those gains with the S&P up 3.6%. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C., Door 99 Studios to Nathan Hager for World and National Headlines. Nathan.
Well, Paul, we are awaiting the latest coronavirus response task force briefing from the White House. It was due to begin minutes ago. As soon as it does, we will bring it to you here on Bloomberg Radio. Meantime, we can tell you the UK is advising its citizens to avoid non-essential travel globally. Police in Paris have begun patrolling the Champs-Élysées to enforce a lockdown in France. Iran's supreme leader even issued a religious edict against unnecessary travel, all to try to contain COVID-19. Here in the U.S., New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced more than 1,300 cases and 12 deaths in New York State alone. He says New York cannot tackle the pandemic on its own.
I remember the fear and the panic that existed in 9/11, where a single moment, your whole concept of life and society can be shaken, where you need to see government perform at its best. You need to see people at their best.
And now we take you to the White House, where President Trump has begun speaking to update on the coronavirus response. Let's listen in now.
Phone or video conference at no additional cost, including with commonly used services like FaceTime and Skype. A historic breakthrough. This has not been done before either. In addition, states have the authority to cover telehealth services for their medical patients. And by doing this, the patient is not seeing the doctor per se, but they're seeing the doctor, so there's no getting close. During this time, we will not enforce applicable HIPAA penalties so that doctors can greatly expand care for their patients using telehealth, so the penalties won't be enforced. We encourage everyone to maximize use of telehealth to limit exposure to the virus. It's been a very successful method of communication, but never used on a scale like we're going to use at telehealth. And you'll be able to also better maintain hospital capacity by doing this. Earlier this morning, I spoke with executives from America's fast food industry, Wendy's, McDonald's, all of the big ones, Burger King, and they were great. We're talking about the pickups in light of yesterday's guidance you heard. To avoid eating or drinking at bars, restaurants, or public food courts. We discussed the important role that the drive-through pickup and delivery service can play in the weeks ahead. So that's happening, and they have been fantastic. They have been absolutely fantastic, and they've been doing it already, but they're keeping it open, and smaller staffs, they're very capable people and very capable companies, and they're doing it, pickups. Our guidance yesterday urges Americans to take action for 15 days to help stem the outbreak. So it's a 15-day period. I guess now would say it's a 14-day period. It's 15 days from yesterday, and we're asking everyone to work at home if possible, postpone unnecessary travel, and limit social gatherings to no more than 10 people. By making shared sacrifices and temporary changes, we can protect the health of our people, and we can protect our economy, because I think our economy will come back very rapidly. So it's 15 days from yesterday. We'll see what happens after that. If we do this right, our country and the world, frankly, but our country can be rolling again pretty quickly. We have to fight that invisible enemy that, I guess, unknown, but we're getting to know it a lot better. Today, the Senate has taken up coronavirus legislation that includes free testing for those who need it, as well as paid sick leave and family medical leave for workers affected by the virus. We're also committed to getting small businesses the support that they need. In fact, one of the things we talked about with the fast food operations, we spoke to the chairman and CEOs of all of the companies, but one of the things we discussed is exactly that, getting small businesses support and flexibility that they need for themselves and for their workers, and that's being worked on right now. At my direction, Secretary Mnuchin is meeting today with senators on additional stimulus packages. I can tell you he was meeting with them late until the night last night, and for a big part of the day yesterday, and tremendous things are happening. There's great spirit, tremendous spirit, and I can say that for Republicans and Democrats. I can say that with respect to Governor Cuomo, we had a great talk this morning. We're both doing a really good job, and we're coordinating it. And we agree, different states need different things, and we agree on that 100%. But we had a very good talk, and I think we're right down the same track, and it's going to be very successful. New York has a pretty big problem. I guess would be the #1 hot spot. That's no fault of anybody's. It's just the way it is. But we're working very closely together. We're also getting FEMA very much involved. They've been involved, but now we're getting them to a different level. And we'll have everything ready. We're dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers should that be necessary. We have them working in some cases, on standby in other cases. But my conversation with Andrew Cuomo was a very, very productive one and a very good one. I appreciate that. We're giving relief to affected industries and small businesses, and we're ensuring that we emerge from this challenge with the prosperous and growing economy, because that's what's going to happen. It's going to pop. One day we'll be standing possibly up here. We'll say, well, we won. And we're going to say that. Sure as you're sitting there, we're going to say that. And we're going to win. And I think we're going to win faster than people think, I hope. Later today, I'll meet with the leaders from the tourism industry, as well as industrial supply retailers and wholesalers, to discuss their critical roles. As you know, I met with the department store people, all of the retailers, the big ones, including Walmart and others. And it was a great meeting. They're stocking up their stores like they've never stocked them before. We're trying to get people to actually buy less, if that's possible. Buy less. Don't take everything, just buy what you need for a while. They're going to stay open all hours of the day, and they've been fantastic. We're taking aggressive action now as one nation and one family so that America can rebound stronger, frankly, stronger than ever before. And we recognize that while many American workers can work from home, many others cannot. Many of our healthcare providers, first responders, and men and women in the food service and manufacturing are showing that they're showing up and standing up to provide us with the goods and services we need. So we want people to stay home where they can, but in many cases, when you talk about food service and manufacturing, certain items in particular, they're going in and they're practicing all of the safety rules and regulations that we talk about. So with that, I'd like to just introduce our Trade Vice President, Mike Pence. He'll say a few words, and then I'll make some other introductions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. It should be very clear to the American people that President Trump has initiated not only a whole-of-government approach, but a whole-of-America approach. And the President's interaction even today and through the course of this day with leaders in industry around the country reflects that we're not only bringing the full weight of the federal government to bear, but the full weight of the American economy. And I know I speak on behalf of the President when I say how inspired we are at the way the American people have stepped up and the way that American businesses, large and small, have stepped up. It's truly been inspiring. Our task force met this morning. We continue to focus on President Trump's priorities of testing, prevention, and supplies. And in that category, I'm pleased to report that while testing is available in all 50 states, as the President just indicated, through the swift action of the FDA at the encouragement of governors around the country, now state health authorities can authorize labs in their state and expand existing testing capabilities. But also in connection with the FDA's action, which you'll hear more about in a moment, we now have continued to expand the public and private partnership that the President forged with vast commercial laboratories around the country, increasing access to the high-volume, high-throughput coronavirus testing that is greatly expanding access even as we speak. Also, our task force received a report this morning on the progress that the U.S. Public Health Service and FEMA are making, working closely with state governments and also partners in the private sector like CVS, Target, Walgreens, and Walmart to expand remote testing sites around the country. And we'll have a full report later this week as those come online. It's important the American people understand that testing is happening all over the country. But all of our health experts wanted me to tell the American people, you don't need the results of testing to know what you should do. And President Trump's 15-day coronavirus guidelines are advice for every American in every community. They're the result of the best guidance of CDC and our health experts. And as the President said, we continue to urge every American over the next 15 days to put into practice the principles in the President's coronavirus guidelines. By every American practicing these principles, we believe that we can slow the spread of the coronavirus. In fact, our experts have told our task force that if every American acts on the President's coronavirus guidelines, we could see a substantial reduction in the spread of the coronavirus. But as the President said, it will take all of us to do it. So if you feel sick, stay home. If someone in your house tests positive, keep the entire household home. Especially if you're a person with an underlying health condition, we urge you to stay home and practice social distancing from people. No social gatherings of more than 10 people. Use drive-through, as the President discussed with leaders in the industry today, and every American, especially practicing common sense and good hygiene. For the American people as a whole, the risk of serious illness remains low, but we're asking every American to partner with us in this effort to slow the spread of the virus, and especially to be mindful of seniors or others with serious underlying health conditions for whom the threat of the coronavirus can be very significant and very real. As I said, the President has continued to push our task force to bring a whole of government, a whole of America approach, and we continue to be inspired the way our nation's governors and nation's businesses are responding. We spoke just yesterday with the leaders of every broadcast network in America that will soon be unveiling a public service campaign using CDC guidelines. And specifically, as we work on the issue of supplies, there were meetings yesterday with Department of Defense officials about excess supplies. The President and I will be meeting today to speak about the supply chain for hospitals. We would make one specific request, and that is we would urge construction companies to donate their inventory of N95 masks to your local hospital and forego additional orders of those industrial masks. Because of what the President asked to be included in legislation moving through the Congress today, those industrial masks that they use on construction sites are perfectly acceptable for healthcare workers to be protected from a respiratory disease. But we're asking construction companies that our President knows very well from his background, we're asking them to donate their N95 masks to their local hospitals and also forego making additional orders. At the President's direction, we will continue to do whatever it takes. We'll continue to marshal the best of the American people, the best of all the people behind me, the people behind them, our state and local officials, and we will get through this, and we will get through this together. Thank you, Mr. President.
I want to thank Chad Wolf and Homeland Security. The job they did at the airports was really incredible. They screened thousands and thousands of people. O'Hare got backed up a little bit, but they got him out. But everybody was screened and screened very carefully. They didn't want to rush it. I think it was 13 airports, and it was an incredible thing. Then they had a big surge also from the UK and Ireland, and that went very smoothly. But they did a fantastic job. They worked long hours, and they did a fantastic job. I'd like to introduce Steve Mnuchin, and then I'm going to ask Steve to leave because he's going to the Hill. He's been working very hard with the Senate and with the House on a very, very big, bold package. It's going to be big and it's going to be bold, and the level, again, of enthusiasm to get something done, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it. So, Steve Mnuchin, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to announce some very significant actions that the President has approved today. The first I would say is earlier today, I sent a letter to Fed Chairman Powell approving his request to use 13.3. And what that will do is the Fed will be setting up a special purpose vehicle, which the Treasury will invest $10 billion in from one of our funds. That will enable the Fed to guarantee the purchase of A1, P1 commercial paper going forward. That is a $1 trillion market and is critical to American workers, it's critical to American business, and it's critical to American savers who have a lot of that money in money market funds. So we heard loud and clear there were liquidity issues. This is very significant and will create, I don't think we'll need to use it all, but we have the ability to have the Fed purchase up to $1 trillion of commercial paper as needed. That has already created significant stability in the market today. The second thing I would say is, we've previously talked about deferring IRS payments. The president earlier this morning authorized me to announce this program. I have previously announced we would defer $200 billion. The president suggested we increase that to $300 billion, which we will be doing. Now, let me just be clear on the specifics. We encourage those Americans who can file their taxes to continue to file their taxes on April 15th, because for many Americans, you will get tax refunds, and we don't want you to lose out on those tax refunds. We want you to make sure you get them. Many people do this electronically, which is easy for them and easy for the IRS. If you owe a payment to the IRS, you can defer up to $1 million as an individual. And the reason why we're doing $1 million is that covers lots of pass-throughs and small businesses, and $10 million to corporations, interest-free and penalty-free for 90 days. All you have to do is file your taxes. You'll automatically not get charged interest and penalties. Now, of course, any American has the right to extend their taxes. We're not taking that right, but the president has asked us to go up to $300 billion. That's also an enormous amount of liquidity in the system. The third thing is the president and I worked on a very significant economic stimulus plan. Thank you for being available last night and throughout this morning, and I will be presenting that to the Republicans in the Senate this morning, and also discussing that with the House. We look forward to having bipartisan support. We're now working with the Senate to pass this legislation very quickly, and these will be payments to small businesses. We've talked about loan guarantees to critical industries such as airlines and hotels, and we've also talked about a stimulus package to the American worker. You can think of this as something like business interruption payments for the American workers. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for the Secretary of the Treasury?
When you say a stimulus package for American workers, do you mean direct payments to Americans, or are you talking about a payroll tax holiday?
Although the president likes the idea of the payroll tax holiday, I will tell you what we've heard from many people, and the president has said we can consider this. The payroll tax holiday would get people money over the next 6 to 8 months. We're looking at sending checks to Americans immediately. And what we've heard from hardworking Americans, many companies have now shut down, whether it's bars or restaurants. Americans need cash now, and the president wants to get cash now. And I mean now, in the next 2 weeks.
How much?
I will be previewing that with the Republicans. There's some numbers out there. They may be a little bit bigger than what's in the press.
Go ahead, please. Please, wait. Please.
What help are you going to give to airlines specifically?
I've had discussions with all the airline CEOs this week. The airline CEOs have had conversations with the Senate and the House. As the president said, I was up with a subset of the Republican senators last night. I've discussed that with them. I think, as you know, this is worse than 9/11. For the airline industry, this is they are almost ground to a halt. The president wants to make sure that although we don't want people to travel unless it's critical, we want to maintain for critical travel the right to have domestic travel.
$60 billion, is that enough?
I'm not going to comment on the specifics. I will tell you we're very focused. There's a lot of workers. This is strategically important to us, and we'll be working with Congress on this.
The airline industry will be in good shape. Go ahead, please.
There's been talk about $1,000 checks to every American, increasing support among Republicans and some Democrats for that. Would you support that going to everyone, or would you support some sort of income restriction on who gets a check?
Well, I think it's clear we don't need to send people who make $1 million a year checks, okay? But that's one of the ideas we like. We're going to preview that today, and then we'll be talking about details afterwards.
Well, I think we're going to do something that gets money to them as quickly as possible. That may not be an accurate way of doing it because obviously some people shouldn't be getting checks for $1,000. And we'll have a pretty good idea by the end of the day what we're going to be doing.
Mr. Secretary,
Yeah, John.
can you tell how would the mechanics of this work? I mean, we've been talking about a payroll tax holiday. Some $500 billion worth was floated to me today. But so how would this idea of sending people a check work? Would that be sort of an advance on what they would pay in payroll tax?
Again, we want to make sure Americans get money in their pockets quickly. We want to make sure small business owners have access to funds. We want to make sure that hotels, airlines, we have an entire package. We'll be laying out those details later today.
Yeah, I have to say this. There are 4 different ways you can do it. That's okay. You can hear me well enough, I imagine.
Sorry.
Okay. People at home, you're right. Those are very important people. Come to think of it, especially your people. Look, we have 4 or 5 ways we can do it. 4 ways in particular. I think there's a 5th possibility, but there are some very good ways of getting the money out and getting it out quickly. Payroll tax is one way, but it does come over a period of months, many months, and we want to do something much faster than that. So I think we have ways of getting money out pretty quickly and very accurately. Okay?
Can you talk about the timeline, please? How quickly do you think you can get this done?
The president has instructed me we have to do this now. So this is now.
By the end of the week?
We are going to work with the Senate, who's in session right now, actively. We will continue to have conversations with the House. I've already spoken to Speaker Pelosi once today. This is stuff that needs to be done now. The president has instructed me that this is no fault to American workers. For medical reasons, we are shutting down parts of this economy, and we're going to use all the tools we have, as I've said, and what tools we don't have, we're going back to Congress. I got to go back to
$850 billion. To those who might be concerned that's too expensive?
We don't want to talk about it, but it's a substantial number. We're going big. The expression, we could do it 2 ways. We could keep going back every day or every week. We're going big, and that's where Mitch McConnell, that's the way he wants to go. That's the way I want to go. I think we want to get it done and have a big infusion as opposed to going through little meetings every couple of days. We don't want to do it that way. We want to go big, go solid. The country is very strong. We've never been so strong, and that's what we're going to be doing. We don't want, with this invisible enemy, we don't want airlines going out of business. We don't want people losing their jobs or not having money to live when they were doing very well just 4 weeks ago. So we're going big, and that's the way it'll be, and that's the way everybody seems to like it on the Hill. Any other questions for Steve?
In addition to airlines and hotels, you had a call with restaurants today. Was any type of emergency assistance discussed on that call? A lot of restaurants have to close. Even if they are doing delivery, they're not making as much money as they would with a full house.
Let me make 2 comments on the restaurants, and the president understands this. This was emphasized this morning. First of all, we want to make sure that the states allow the drive-through portion of these fast foods to stay open, particularly in a time period where we're telling people don't go to restaurants. These companies feed a big part of America, and I expect they're going to feed a bigger part of America. The second thing they asked me to emphasize, I wasn't going to do it now, but as long as you asked, many of these companies have apps. You can order ahead of time. That way when you get there, it's as simple as they'll have it packed. They can give it to you with social distancing, and it'll be very fast. So we expect that they will be able to feed a large part of the population. And in regards to support, I will say a lot of these businesses are small businesses, are companies, franchisees, 500 or less, and we have a specific program we'll be unveiling that helps all businesses, small and medium-sized businesses of 500 and less.
Secretary, also a question regarding Marriott Corporation. It announced that it is furloughing thousands of individuals because of the impacts of the coronavirus. Will your legislation help those individuals?
I hope so. That's one of the reasons why we got to act very quickly, because we understand whether it's the airlines, hotels, for good reasons to protect the United States on medical issues. These businesses are shut down, and the president wants to make sure, as I've said, we will use all the powers we have. You saw this today, $1 trillion of potential liquidity into the market, and the powers we don't have, we're going to Congress. And I will say there's a lot of bipartisan support for these issues. So I'm going to apologize because I have to go deal with some other things, if that's okay, Mr. President.
Thanks, sir.
Oh, yeah, I do want to comment on this, okay? We absolutely believe in keeping the markets open, okay? Americans need to know they have access to their money. After September 11th, the only reason why the markets were closed was because the technology was disrupted. I've been on the phone with the major banks, with the New York Stock Exchange. Everybody wants to keep it open. We may get to a point where we shorten the hours if that's something they need to do, but Americans should know that we are going to do everything to make sure that they have access to their money at their banks, to the money in their 401ks, and to the money in stocks. So I want to just be very clear, we intend to keep the markets open.
And the banks are record-setting strong, so we have that, which is a much different event than what we had not so long ago. John, go ahead.
Mr. President, you mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers. That you've had a conversation with Governor Cuomo. He believes that New York is going to run out of hospital beds. Are you prepared to mobilize the Army Corps
we've been asked to
increase capacity?
Yes, we're starting to. We're starting the process, and it's a process. We hope it's not going to be necessary, but it could be necessary. The state is working on it very hard themselves, but we'll probably supplement what they're doing.
And given that many of the precursors for our pharmaceuticals come from China, and there have been supply disruptions, that supply chain has been broken to some degree. Do you expect that we could run into a shortage of prescription drugs?
No, I don't see that at all, and I think China has every incentive to make sure that things work well. China wants to make sure that things work very well. They have every incentive to do so. John?
Mr. President, the governor of Ohio has called off the election that was supposed to happen today, the primary election. Do you agree with that decision, and what steps are you taking to ensure that elections going forward, if this pandemic continues, that elections will be able to happen, including, of course, the big one in the fall?
Well, the governor of Ohio is doing a great job. He called that off, and we'll see what happens. There's a court case, and it hasn't been fully determined yet. But if he called it off, I could understand that because, he's definitely somebody that knows what he's doing. We'll be seeing very soon. They're going by the rule of 10 as opposed to 50, and that's pretty tough. I would say probably you could violate that if you wanted to for an election. I just think an election is a very special thing. He chose a different date, I think a date sometime in June. But that would be a decision that would be made by him. He felt it was necessary. The courts somebody's challenging it, so the courts will ultimately decide.
Well, what are you doing to ensure that further elections, if we're still in this situation a month from now, 2 months from now?
What I'm doing, John, is very simple. We're getting rid of this virus. That's what we're doing. That's the best thing we can do. By the way, for the markets, for everything, it's very simple solution. We want to get rid of it. We want to have as few deaths as possible. This is a horrible thing. You look at what's going on with Italy. We don't want to be in a position like that, but a much larger, because we're a much larger country. We don't want to be there. And I think we've done really well. I think we've done well. I think the states have done well. We're all working together. The best thing we can do is get rid of the virus. Once that's gone, it's going to pop back like nobody's ever seen before. That's my opinion, but I think it'll pop back like nobody's ever seen before. Please.
Mr. President, just to follow up on John's question, specifically how many new hospital facilities could the Army Corps of Engineers build? And also, what specific measures are you taking to try to increase the number of ventilators in the stockpile?
Right. We've ordered massive numbers of ventilators. We have, by any normal standards, we have a lot of respirators, ventilators. We have tremendous amounts of equipment, but compared to what we're talking about here, this has never been done before. And yesterday I gave the governors the right to go order directly if they want, if they feel they can do it faster than going through the federal government. Now, we've knocked out all of the bureaucracy. It's very direct, but it's still always faster to order directly. And I gave them, that was totally misinterpreted by the New York Times on purpose, unfortunately. But it's very important. Yes, Mike?
I could amplify.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. Our president directed us to work with the Department of Defense. There's two ways that DOD can be helpful in terms of expanding medical capacity. I know the governor of New York has asked us to look at the Army Corps of Engineers, which could perhaps renovate existing buildings. But the president also has us inventorying what you all would understand as field hospitals or MASH hospitals that can be deployed very quickly. We spoke with Governor Inslee yesterday in Washington State. We have resources in that part of the country that we could move. And as governors make these requests, we will process them, bring them to the president. But there are two different lanes that DOD can provide, in addition to many medical supplies to augment our national reserves. And the president has tasked us to evaluate, make available, and to consider every
the only one that has no cases. So obviously that's being treated differently than in New York or California, different parts of California. I do say this, though, the Army Corps of Engineers is ready, willing, and able. We have to give them the go-ahead. If we find that it's going to be necessary, we think we can have quite a few units up very rapidly. I'm going to work with Governor Cuomo. I'm going to work with a number of the governors. Governor Newsom has been very generous in his words, and I'm being generous to him too, because we're all working together very well. And I think a lot of very positive things have taken place. We're talking to California about different sites, but we can have a lot of units up fairly quickly if we think we need them. I think what I'll do is I might ask Seema to say a few words on the telehealth, and then we can get back to this, please. Seema?
Thank you, Mr. President. And as the President announced earlier, we are doing a dramatic expansion of what's known as telehealth for our 62 million Medicare beneficiaries who are amongst the most vulnerable to the coronavirus. And we're acting in accord with the appropriations bill that was signed on March 6th, as well as the President's emergency declaration last week. And this action is a part of our broader effort to ensure that government requirements, rules, and regulations don't get in the way of patient care during an emergency. And today's announcement builds on the significant progress that the President has already made over the past 3 years around telehealth services. And while we have allowed for virtual check-ins, full telehealth benefits have been restricted to those living in rural areas, established patients, and just for those brief visits. But no longer, Medicare beneficiaries across the nation, no matter where they live, will now be able to receive a wide range of services via telehealth without ever having to leave home. And these services can also be provided in a variety of settings, including nursing homes, hospital outpatient departments, and more. And thanks to the leadership of HHS, we'll also be temporarily relaxing certain HIPAA requirements so that doctors can provide telehealth with their own phones. And we'll be using enforcement discretion when it comes to collecting copays so that cost won't be a barrier. This is a part of our larger efforts around mitigation. And as we are encouraging Americans to stay home whenever possible, we don't want our Medicare policies getting in the way. And so consider the implications of this. Perhaps an elderly patient with diabetes needs a routine checkup, and this has nothing to do with the coronavirus. And so with our new telehealth benefits, this person who's not really, who's at risk for the coronavirus doesn't have to venture outside their home. They can talk to their doctor via Skype, and they don't have to risk exposure to the virus, and they can receive that care from the safety of their own home. It could be another Medicare recipient who's experiencing mild flu-like symptoms, and instead of leaving the house and sitting in a waiting room full of other vulnerable people, they can also receive advice from their doctor from their home. And this shift is very important for clinicians and providers who over the coming weeks will face considerable strain on their time and resources. And now Medicare patients who don't absolutely need to come in to an office won't have to. And this allows the healthcare system to prioritize for care for those that are that have more needs or in dire need, and preserves protective equipment as well. State Medicaid agencies can also provide telehealth services without federal approval, and so we're asking all states to make this available as well. And we've also asked private insurance companies to expand their telehealth benefits and make it clear to their providers and their members what they cover. As our nation seeks to balance the twin imperatives of getting Americans the care that they need during this outbreak and limiting the spread of the virus, the impact of this historic action simply cannot be overstated. In an emergency, those on the front line shouldn't have to worry about federal rules and red tape, hamstringing them when they need flexibility above all else. And we're doing everything in our power to make sure that that doesn't happen. I also just want to briefly mention that because of the President's emergency declaration, we do have the ability to provide a lot of Medicaid waivers, and Florida was the first state to be approved. We were able to do that in a matter of days. Thank you.
Any questions, please?
Where do senior citizens go for instructions on how to do the telehealth?
They should call their doctor's office, and their doctor's office can tell them how to do that. Also, there may be some of our Medicare members that may not have access to equipment, so we're asking family members to help with this, but also respecting the requirements around social distancing, and if any of those family members or neighbors have symptoms, they should obviously stay away.
Will you be posting numbers also?
That's correct.
That might
exactly.
be the easiest way to do it.
Yes.
If you post in ads, if you post some numbers.
And they can also call our 1-800 Medicare number, and they can also get information. Those phone lines are open.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Admiral, if you'd say a few words about where we're going, and then I'd like to ask Dr. Birx to say a couple of words, but how the system's working.
Well, thank you very much. As we talked about earlier this week, the commercial system is rapidly advancing in the testing capabilities. As of today, our public health laboratories, meaning the CDC and the public health labs, have reported out 31,878 tests, so almost we will have that upcoming in the next day or so, and then Ambassador Birx will have this whole process fixed with the legislation that everything will roll up into a common reporting probably by the end of next week. In terms of our drive-through laboratories, again, these are blossoming all over the country by individual states. The ones that we are heavily involved in and really pushing equipment to, we expect over the next few days to begin setting up 47 of these in approximately 12 states. The material is already palletized and being shipped to the locations. Most cities have the specific locations. Some do not, but it's still going to a central receiving. And we know that we'll be deploying at least 140 Commissioned Corps officers. About half of the sites have reported their requirements. About 140 officers will be going. We expect that to go up. So this is going on the way we expected. We did a trial site yesterday with a full mobile unit for drive-through with full PPE. We had a lot of kinks in the system, as you can expect. That's why we do a test before we go out into the field. Don't expect these to be 100% perfect the moment they come. They're going to be adapted to the state and the local situation, but we're very confident that these will add testing to the already very robust healthcare system and commercial system. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Admiral. And this has never been done before, and it sets a great roadmap for future. Should we have something like this in the future? I hope we don't. But it's never been done before, and they've done an incredible job. And again, we're working with the states and relying on the states. We have to, because they have, it's point of sale, it's point of sight, and we're in, I think, just about every instance getting along really well with the states. If I could, Dr. Birx, if you could say a couple of words, please.
Great, thank you, Mr. President. So I think what you've been hearing from us is to find solutions that are high quality and sustainable based on the frontline workers and governor's requests. And those come in on the governor's call. We've been immediately responsive to those. And that's the level of red tape and bureaucracy that we have removed. I think that point about sustainability and quality is very important because, as the President says, we're creating a roadmap for a different level of functionality for future pandemics. Our flu pandemic preparedness plan was a plan. Now we're seeing where we have to revise, where we have to create new avenues of research, new avenues of work to really ensure that the need of the American people can be reached. We were adamant about having a high-quality test based on our commercial vendors. Over the next few months, you will begin to see that other tests that were utilized around the world were not of the same quality, resulting in false positives and potentially false negatives. These tests were studied by the FDA to really ensure that they are that level of quality, and we've given the states the permission to ensure that same level of quality. Now, I want to just say 1 minute on the testing. Testing should not be used as an assessment of your risk. We are asking every single American, no matter what your generation, from Z and up to X and millennials in between, to really ensure that you're following these guidelines. We hear every night of people who are not in work, moving that time into bars and other areas of large gatherings. If we continue with that process, we will fail in containing this virus. So every single generation has a role to play. We're asking our older generation to stay in their homes. And we're asking the younger generations to support them in social contacting through videos and other Skype-type functions, or just the simple telephone. We're asking the younger generations to stop going out in public places, to bars and restaurants, and spreading asymptomatic virus onto countertops and knobs and grocery stores and grocery carts. I heard an innovation last night and this morning again on the news. I really want to applaud the private sector who are now creating senior-only shopping times. I think that's extraordinary. I think that shows what America brings, and I think other countries will learn from us about how to really protect seniors in this type of way. I'm hoping it carries through to next year when we have our flu epidemic, where we can really have a very different profile of the amount of mortality that we have during flu that we never talk about. Anywhere from 15,000 to 45,000 individuals are lost every year. If we learn how to do this well and sustain some of those core changes, we can change the way respiratory viruses, not only for this, but the future, affect Americans.
It's a big thing.
A question on the clinical data. So we've had now roughly 5,000 people test positive. We've had 90 deaths or so. When are we going to know the data of who those people are, who has been infected, what the ages are, what the pre-existing conditions are, how serious it was, both for those who have been tested positive, but also those who have died?
Well, you are singing my sheet of music. I'm very data-oriented, so thank you for bringing up this issue of data. I really want to applaud HHS. We had a discussion about this several days ago. They've made calls into Seattle and California to really understand that, and also importantly to understand how many of their patients needed ventilators, how many of them needed oxygen support, how many of them needed and what they needed. Could we predict early someone who was going to have a more difficult course? These are all the questions we're asking and answering right now. We did get an early report back from Santa Clara and Seattle. We're digesting it. We just got it this morning. We're looking at that carefully because we think that roadmap is very important to other communities. We have not discussed this with New York yet. We do know from other countries, and that all is available online, that profile. You can see that mortality under 30 is extraordinarily low. The mortality across the board outside of Wuhan is now settling somewhere around 0.7, but that should not be reassuring because it's much higher in people with pre-existing medical conditions, even if young, and people that are older with pre-existing medical conditions. And so we still want every American focused on doing what they can do today to change the course of this pandemic.
We're committed to making that data public so we will all know.
We're committed not only to making it public, but to have a website that everyone can see in real time.
Dr. Birx, if I could just follow up. You all are signaling a much more aggressive posture toward containment mitigation now. And many states have been very aggressive. But there is a small number of states that have not issued public guidance to their residents. Is it important for the success of the effort that 100% of the states be forward-leaning on this? And if so, Mr. President, what would be your message to those states that have not? Okay.
So that's why the Vice President and the President yesterday issued those critical guidelines. As I said this morning on Fox and Friends, you can look at them as guidelines, you can look at them as requirements, and you can look at them as the president asking every American in every state to follow those. That's why we put them out at the federal level. We wanted to make sure every American knew what they could do today to change the course of this epidemic. I think it's empowering. I think it says all of us have a social responsibility to each other, and that's why we believe that every mayor and every governor should be instituting these guidelines that came from the White House and the President of the United States.
And we've been very tough on those states. I know exactly who you're talking about. We've been very tough on them. Thank you. Please, go ahead.
A follow-up question on the testing. You've been telling us for days now that millions of tests have been sent out. So why have fewer than 60,000 people actually been tested?
I think you will see different numbers this week. You heard just of 8,000. Remember, all of these tests, the high-speed tests, were approved last Friday night, and last Thursday night. I think if I could talk to Thermo Fisher and the other groups that have these platforms out there, do not rely on a pull technology push out those tests. Because we can only make them available, groups have to order them. So we've been talking to Thermo Fisher, one of the key platforms, to push out tests based on need and not wait for orders.
And is that where the issue is, getting the tests out, or is it getting the tests conducted?
That's a great question. I know part of it is getting the test out right now. I think the Admiral and others are working on getting the issues related to getting the test conducted. Obviously, that does take time. He is working on innovative solutions that are creative and sustainable, that will be a game changer in testing, but we don't have the data yet. This is a critical comparator. Can you do it yourself? Can you actually sample yourself? These are the kinds of things we're working on right now, and he's getting the data for us.
And the states are actually doing a lot of it. The governors and the states are doing a lot of it, with even our tests. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us a sense of how long these tough new restrictions will need to be in place until we start to see the rate of this virus going down? And also, can you speak to this study that as many as 2.2 million people in the United States could die if there weren't this type of action by the government taken? To what extent did that prompt what we saw yesterday?
I think, models are models, and they're based on input, and they're based on infectiousness without any controls. I can tell you we've never seen that level of infections that modeled up to that 2.2 million in mortality. So we are looking at that. We are having a particularly model meeting tomorrow. I think that's really going to be important. I've dealt with a lot of modelers in my time. They're wonderful people. But they all have their favorite inputs and they all have their favorite integration functions. So we're evaluating all of those so we can integrate and create the best model for the United States based on the best data. And that first set of recommendations you saw were based on what we could do today to prevent anything that looks like that. If I could just say one other thing to the hospitals and dentists out there. Things that don't need to be done over the next 2 weeks, don't get it done. If you're a person with an elective surgery, you don't want to go into a hospital right now. There's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of people doing a lot of other things to save people's lives. So let's all be responsible and cancel things that we can cancel to really free up hospital beds and space. And then let's do everything that we can to ensure that we don't need the ventilators because we protected the people who would have needed to use them.
And are you looking at the possibility of more actions like, for example, limiting travel within the United States? Are you looking
It's possible. It's possible. We'll see how it goes. I think there's been great cooperation with local governments, states. We'll see how it goes. It's going right now pretty well. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Can I follow on that, Mr. President,
Please.
very quickly?
Yeah.
Just very quickly. Do you need to invoke the Defense Production Act to get more of those medical supplies to different hospitals?
Well, we're able to do that if we have to. Right now we haven't had to, but it's certainly ready. If I want it, we can do it very quickly. We've studied it very closely over 2 weeks ago, actually. We'll make that decision pretty quickly if we need it. We hope we don't need it. It's a big step.
More help from the federal government when it comes to those supplies.
When you say the states, in particular, 3 states need some help, and some states, have 2 people, 3 people, no people. In the case of, again, West Virginia. So we're looking at it very closely. We've taken it apart 15 different ways. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very big step, and if we need that step, we'll take it. Okay?
Quick follow on Kristen's first question. A lot of people have got travel to places that aren't considered hotspots, Caribbean, Mexico, that sort of thing, over the next few weeks. Would you recommend that they follow through with those plans?
I would just say enjoy your home stay. I would just say right now, we have to get this problem fixed, and then we'll get back into business really quick. We'll open up our country, we'll open up our society, the world will hopefully open up. We see areas of the world that haven't done well, and we see areas that are doing very well, and I would put us in the category of doing very well for a country so big. I think that I would recommend that they just enjoy their living room. Jack. Yeah, go ahead, please.
What do you say to people who are not heeding these guidelines from the White House? And then also I have a question on asymptomatic people, Dr. Burks.
I'm not happy with those people if they're not. But, those people are being shouted down by other people. They know they're being, it's almost like self-policing. People went in, there were a couple of instances, I guess, probably more than a couple, where people are not happy when they see others doing what they're not supposed to be doing. We have to get rid of this. We have to win this war, and ideally quickly, because the longer it takes, it's not a good situation. And I'm not even talking about the economy. I'm talking about the lives of a lot of people. Yeah, please, did you have one?
Will the White House put any restrictions on corporate bonuses for companies that do get bailed out like airlines?
I'm going to ask, I think I'm going to ask Mike, answer that question.
I think it's all a work in progress. What President Trump has made clear to industries around the country is that we're going to do whatever it takes. We understand this is an extraordinary moment in the life of our nation. It's the reason why the President brought in leaders of the financial sector, airline industry. He'll meet with all additional industry leaders today in tourism and hospitality. But he has tasked the Secretary of the Treasury to work with members of Congress in both parties to make sure that we construct the kind of economic support that will allow those industries to weather the period of the coronavirus and then to come back stronger than ever before.
We've had such incredible. I don't know. It's almost the word spirit is the best word. It's like a spirit. The banks have come in, and the banks are doing things that they would have never done. They're working on extensions and lots of things that they wouldn't have done. Co-pays with regard to the insurance companies. I mean, for them to be doing what they're doing, all about the co-pays. They would have never done that, and they did it. They were in my office. They, I would say, the 11 biggest in this country. I guess probably the 11 biggest of the world. The big ones, all the big ones, and they did things on copay that nobody would be doing, that they wouldn't have done in a million years, but they're doing it. There's a great spirit going on right now in the country. So you want to, yes, please.
Dr. Fauci, you've said you like being accused of overreacting because that is an indication we may be doing things necessary to beat this, bend the curve. How long do you think it will take for you to be confident that, yes, we're bending the curve, or no, we're not?
I can't give you a firm number on that because the dynamics of outbreaks in some respects are predictable historically. They do this and that. We don't know because this is really unprecedented. I mean, of all the outbreaks that I've been involved with over the last at least 36 years and then going historically back, we've never had a situation where the mobilization of all the different components, travel restrictions, internal containment, mitigation, financial assistance, public health assistance, testing. So we don't really know. But the one thing I do know that if you look at models with all of their vicissitudes of models, is that when you have input into the kinds of mitigations and things that we're doing, we're going to see a hump instead of a peak. I would be really surprised if all the things that we're doing, and this is really a comprehensive approach. I was struck as I was listening to everyone make their presentations that, I'm a scientist, I'm a health person, and I'm a physician who sees patients. So I look at it from one particular standpoint. But what I'm being impressed by is that this is really a comprehensive thing that has multiple components to it. All of them got to succeed if we're going to get to that end point that I've described multiple times from this podium. So I hope that if everyone does their job, we're going to be able to give you a number and say, we've seen that inflection and we're coming down. I would hesitate to do it now, to be honest with you, because it might be misleading, and I don't want to be misleading. I just want to say one other thing, because I heard Dr. Birx say it, and I think we need to say it over and over again. When I was young, a long time ago, I felt that I was invulnerable, the way I think many of us feel we're invulnerable. And when we're asking the young people to help us with this mitigation strategy, by staying out of the bars, staying out of the restaurants, really trying to distance yourself, don't get the attitude, well, I'm young, I'm invulnerable. You are, well, in some respects, you're certainly less vulnerable than I am. However, what you might inadvertently do, and I know you don't want to do that, you don't want to put your loved ones at risk, particularly the ones who are elderly and the ones who have compromised conditions. We can't do this without the young people cooperating. Please cooperate with us. Thank you.
Dr. Fauci, and I'm going to read my notes so I get this right, but there's apparently a new study out of China. It found that the vast majority of cases, 86%, were in untested patients with mild to no symptoms. So what does that say about the impact of testing, and does it mean that testing should actually go beyond the sickest patients?
That question keeps coming up, and I'm not going to evade the question, but I want to make a point. We tend to think that we're not going to be able to mitigate or contain without testing. They complement each other in some respects, but they're separate channels. Even if we had no testing, we should be doing what we're doing now. The question you're asking, so I won't evade it specifically, would it be important outside of a doctor-patient coming in together, of knowing what's out there, what might be under the radar screen? The answer to your question is yes. So let me tell you what the CDC is doing right now. They're going out there, and part of their program is to get a feel for what is there that wasn't initially thought to be coronavirus, that was thought to be something else. When you do that, you're also going to get a feel of what the penetrance is in society. So we are heading with the high throughput things that you've been hearing about to get an answer to your question.
Dr. Governor Cuomo said this morning he believes that we'll see a peak in terms of infection in 45 days. Would you concur with that?
It's possible. I mean, I know the governor has been really, I believe, doing a really good job of trying to stay ahead of this. 45 days is not unreasonable. You have to be careful. When you get a number, you own the number, and then if the number doesn't come out, you're in trouble. And that's the reason why, from our standpoint, from the federal government, we're talking about a range. So within that range, I mean, it isn't like you want to be correct for the sake of being correct, but you don't want to be wed to something and then have to back off.
Go ahead, please.
When is the soonest that we'll know that these new guidelines are actually bending the curve or actually working? And is there a point in time where in the next couple of weeks where you'll be able to tell the president more draconian measures are needed?
Well, okay, so what's happening, I mean, if you look as a metaphor, it's kind of like a race against the virus. If left to its own devices, we'll do this. And us trying to somehow blunt that. Now, you could see the virus going up and up, and your effect, your work, what you're trying to do, may actually be having an effect. But you may not see it because it'll still be going up. And as you're trying to implement your interference with the virus, you may not realize that you are actually interfering. And you'll say, wait a minute, it's still going up. What's going on? You've done nothing. But you don't know whether it would do this versus that. So the answer to your question, it probably would be several weeks and maybe longer before we know whether we're having an effect. It may be at the end of the day, we'll see a curve that would have been way, way up. But I wouldn't put us to task every few days. Well, wait a minute, it's going up. Is it working or not? That would be really misleading if we do that.
Go ahead, regarding the 15-day guidelines which were announced yesterday. One of those guidelines was a recommendation against gatherings of 10 or more people. And today, the governor of Alabama issued her own guidelines, and it was a recommendation against gatherings of 25 or more people. What is your recommendation for people of Alabama, people across all of the country, as far as the guidelines that were announced yesterday by the federal government?
Okay, so the one thing we don't want to do is to get hung up on the difference between 10 and 25. I think you might agree with that. When we give guidelines, they're only guidelines. We sit down, we look at the data, as Dr. Burke said, we're data-driven, and we say, on different models, 10 looks good. If someone wants to do 25, we're not going to fault them, but if someone wants to come to us and ask us what we think the best is, we stand by the numbers. It isn't perfect. It isn't precise math. It's assumptions and it's data that make you get your decision.
But would it be more effective if every state and every city in the country was playing by the same rules instead of different?
Of course. But this is the United States of America. There's a lot of free enterprise there. People do their own thing. And quite frankly, I don't think there's a big deal difference between 10 and 25. We got many, many more important things to worry about than that difference.
Mr. President, thank you. Going back to supply chains and then talking about preparedness for the future, yesterday Larry Kudlow said that there is an idea floating around the administration to cut taxes for companies who would be bringing their supply chains back to the United States. He said he specifically liked immediate 100% write-offs for structures, equipment, but he said you hadn't endorsed that yet. Would you endorse an idea like that?
We're looking at many ideas. That's one of them, frankly, and we're looking at creating incentives for companies, not only that type of company, but other companies. We're also looking to help companies such as the airline industry within the airline industry, and we'll be doing that. We will be doing that. This is not their fault. And they've been very understanding, actually, and we're going to be helping them. We will have a very powerful airline industry, and it'll start up as soon as this is over. We'll have those planes ready to go. So we have to help them during the short term. We're very important. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to know, have you taken a look at some of these models, such as the Imperial College London model, that kind of poses a very difficult choice, whether it's shutting down society or overwhelming the healthcare system? Is that something that
we've looked at every model? We've relied on the very talented people, and there's no better team than the people behind me. And I will say that all of the people that have done those models are all in constant touch with Dr. Birx and Tony and everybody that you've been hearing so much from over the last couple of weeks. We've looked at many different models, and the model we have is we want to save a lot of lives. We want to save a lot of lives. If we get too steep on that curve, you're going to lose a lot of lives, perhaps unnecessarily. Now, we're going to find out. Everything has a risk. We're going to see. But if people do what we're telling them to do, what we're asking them to do, you're going to see the saving of a lot of lives. Now, Boris, in UK yesterday, you saw what happened. It looked like they were going a different way, but then he went away of similar, I don't know exactly, but I would say we had a conversation yesterday similar to what we're doing. So a lot of people seem to think this is going to be, we are looking to save the maximum number of lives. Everything else is going to come back. A life is never going to come back. But everything else, our economy is going to come roaring back. You're going to know. We're going to know. We're going to all know that day. Somebody was asking about the day. When will you know? When will you know? We're going to know. All of a sudden, we're going to say, wow, that's looking good. That's looking good. That's looking good. And we're going to be on the other side of the curve. And that's a day that we look forward to. Okay?
Something, sir, that you saw this week, though, that made you decide that, yes, now is the time to implement these much more stringent social distancing measures.
No, I don't think so. This is where we were going. I really think from the beginning, this is where we were going. This is what we had in mind. We're just going step by step. That was the next step, the next logical step. As Dr. Fauci said, and I think very importantly, one of the most important things when you write the history of this was the fact that we closed it down to China and Europe, but in particular China. We closed it down to China, the source, very, very early, very, very early, far earlier than even the great professionals wanted to do. And I think in the end that's going to be, that will have saved a tremendous number of lives.
Follow-up, one on the economy and the other on the broader picture here, but just to follow up on my colleague, some people did note that your tone seemed more somber yesterday. You talked about that August timeline. Did you see a projection? Some people thought perhaps that 2 million potentially that could die maybe prompted part of that. Was there a shift in tone?
I didn't think, I have seen that where people actually liked it, but I didn't feel different. I've always known this is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries. I think now it's in almost 120 countries all over the world. No, I've always viewed it as very serious. There was no difference yesterday from days before. I feel the tone is similar, but some people said it wasn't.
Last one on the economy. Your former economic advisor said almost 100% chance of a recession. Do you see it that way?
It could be. I mean, I don't think in terms of recession. I think in terms of getting it out, because when we're finished with the virus, we will win. We will win. And when that victory takes place, our economy is going to go through the roof. It is so pent up. It is so built up. It is so ready to go in an upward direction. But we have to knock out this enemy. This is a really tough enemy, but we have to knock out all of us. That's all of us. So I don't think in terms of recession, not recession. It's words. We have to knock out this, and we will have an economy. I actually think we'll have an economy like we've never had before. It's all pent up. Did you have something to say, Mike? Yes.
I think the question about the actions that the president's authorized, beginning in January, when he took the unprecedented step of suspending all travel from China, the efforts to issue travel advisories for portions of Italy and South Korea, and then to begin screening all the passengers, the efforts regarding suspending travel from Europe, and what went into effect at midnight last night, adding the UK and Ireland to that, have all been informed by the experts that are surrounding us. What the president's asked us to do from the very beginning, as Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci often say, is let's follow the data, bring the president the best options in response to what is actually happening on the ground. But with regard to yesterday's 15-day slow the spread plan, our team unanimously brought to the president these very strong recommendations for every American, because we truly believe we are at a point in this epidemic in our country when we can reduce the number of people that actually are exposed to or contract the coronavirus. But we'll continue to bring the best data, the best evidence, and the best recommendations, frankly, of the best health experts in the world, and the president will continue to make decisions that put the health of America first.
Mr. President, in other words, reduce the number of people that die. That's what we're trying to do. And when you do the steep curve, a lot of people are going to die. A lot of people. You know, the worst ever, they say, 1918. And I don't have to go into the numbers, but they were unbelievable numbers. Had they known and had they done what we had now, it would have been a very much different story. It would still be tragic, but it would have been a very much different. But that was the one that people write about. That was an incredible pandemic, like we haven't seen. But we have done something that I hope. Hopefully, we will all have made the right moves. We're all in this together, including you, and we want to see fair press. And I tell you what, it's been generally speaking, I think it's been a great thing to see. It's been very, very getting along with Democrats, getting along with Republicans, for the Democrats themselves. There's been a lot of spirit. There's been a lot of things happening that I haven't seen happen in the first almost now 3.5 years. It's been very nice to see. That's one of the good things. But what really the good thing is, we have to knock it out. We have to win. And we want to keep that slope as low as possible, because that's a lot of lives in there. Let's go back there. Somebody that didn't get one, please. Go ahead.
Mr. President, this has had a huge impact on China's economy as well. Have you received any indication from officials there that they're going to have trouble meeting the purchase agreements, part of the Phase 1 deal, particularly the agricultural buy?
Well, they need our product very badly. And no, I haven't received any. We have good relationship with China. I have not received anything to that. No, we have a signed agreement. They're going to be buying, and they have been buying a lot of product. Yeah, please.
Earlier today, Dr. Birx was talking about the possibility of our hospital system being overburdened, overtaxed, and she talked about certain options that are available to the United States if that happens, including VA hospitals, Department of Defense medical treatment facilities, and even hospital ships. At what point do you tap into those options?
Well, I'll know the point, and by speaking with Governor Cuomo and other governors, we're going to know the point. It's going to be different for New York than it's going to be from, Iowa, or from Idaho, or from West Virginia, frankly, or for, it's different. New York has got a big problem. The state of Washington has a big problem. California has some big problems. Everyone's doing a good job, but we're going to know when it will be, and I believe it'll be more spot than it will be. It's not going to be the whole thing. It's going to be spots. There are some hot spots that are in trouble, big trouble, and there are other areas that are in no trouble at all. They watch it on television. They don't know. It's just not affecting them, and they're lucky. They're lucky, but there are areas of the country that don't have much of a problem, and some that don't have any problem. They're not going to have a problem with hospitals, but some areas like New York, California, state of Washington, they're going to have some difficulty. And when we see that coming, we're going to be in there. We're already making preparation for it.
Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, your trade advisor, Peter Navarro, have been recommending an executive order that would ensure that the raw materials for pharmaceuticals and medical devices are manufactured here in the United States. We were getting some indications last week that you were close to signing this executive order. Can you tell us?
Well, we're looking at different things, John. I don't want to say exactly. Right now, China's been sending us everything we need, but we're looking at some alternatives. Yes, we are looking for alternatives, and we have other places. Ireland does a lot of work for us. You know that in that world, in the pharma world, a very tremendous producer, and we are looking to bring a lot more back home. And you know me for a long time. I've been talking about this for many years, long before I decided to run for president. I've been talking about this, and we have to be able to take care of our country, and that was one of the many things on the list. So we'll be talking about it, but we are discussing it, and Marco is very much involved, and Peter is very much involved. A lot of people are involved, and a lot of people feel that way, but we'll be discussing. Let's go, please.
Thank you, sir. You said Canada has closed its borders to non-citizens. Are you considering...
Not to the United States.
Not to the United States, of course. Are you considering closing the land borders in the United States? And also, you've discussed...
Well, Canada has not closed it to the United States, so we're working very closely with Canada, but they have not closed it. They have closed it to the world, but they have not closed it to the United States.
Are you considering closing the U.S. land borders?
I don't want to say that, but we are discussing things with Canada, and we're discussing things with Mexico, quite honestly. And again, the relationship is outstanding with both. Outstanding. We just signed our deal, USMCA, and the relationship is very strong. Go ahead, please.
China and others have criticised you for using the phrase Chinese virus. How do you feel about that? Are you going to continue using that phrase?
Well, China was putting out information which was false, that our military gave this to them. That was false. And rather than having an argument, I said, I have to call it where it came from. It did come from China. So I think it's a very accurate term. But no, I didn't appreciate the fact that China was saying that our military gave it to them. Our military did not give it to anybody.
Critics say using that phrase creates a stigma.
No, I don't think so. No, I think saying that our military gave it to them creates a stigma.
Mr. President,
please.
When you speak to travel and tourism executives today, what specific help are you going to offer to them, if at all, or is it still vague?
Well, we're going to help. They need help. Look, let's face it. They go from having record-breaking years. This is the third year of record-breaking years, travel and tourism, airlines, everything. They were doing record numbers, ordering new planes, building new hotels. Everything was really hunky-dory. And then one day we hear about this rumor in China, and then we find out it's much more than a rumor. And then all of a sudden we make a great decision to close it up early. It would be a whole different world. It would be a whole different world. But we make a decision to close it up to China, and all of a sudden tourism, and then we close it up to Europe, which, people never heard of this before. I'm not sure that that's ever been done. I know that when I made the decision to close it to China, people told me that's never been done before, but it was a great decision. We make good decisions. So I'll tell you my best decision. The people behind me are total pros. All over the world, they're respected. Dr. Birx, Anthony, who's become a major television star for all the right reasons. No, he's just so professional, so good. The people that we have working here have been incredible, and they're totally respected. The Admiral has been incredible, having to do with the testing, incredible, and he's viewing this as testing also for the future. We're building a platform. When we took over this platform, first thing the Admiral said was, this was not designed for what we're talking about, millions of people. It wasn't. And it's nobody's fault. It's not like who could have ever predicted a thing like this. But we broke it down, and it's really going to be an incredible system. And it is now a great system. I just want to say these are incredible people standing behind me. They're the most respected in the world. Every country that you've mentioned today so far has called them, and they call them all the time for advice. There's nobody better than what we have.
Why haven't we seen Dr. Redfield the last couple of days?
I don't know. I can't
he's
imagine.
in Atlanta running the CDC.
I can tell you he's doing a good job. We're very happy with him.
Mr. President,
please, you have it. Go ahead.
Mr. President, yesterday we were being told that the payroll tax was going to comprise the lion's share of fiscal stimulus.
Right.
We also had the markets fall quite dramatically yesterday, and did that inform?
It wasn't about the payroll tax.
Did that inform your decision? What made you make that change, and when did you make that change?
Well, I didn't make a change. We're looking at payroll tax, and we're looking at various other forms of getting money to people. And the payroll tax is something that I've always liked. The problem is it does take a period of time, months before they really see something. And we don't really have months in terms of people living. A lot of these, you have people that work on tips. You have people it's a large number of people. It's a tremendous, who would think this, right? And they do nicely. They work very hard, but they work on tips. We have to take care of our people. We don't want to have people suffering during this period. It wasn't their fault that this thing all of a sudden was upon us. So we're looking at we're also looking at payroll tax. It's possible. It's also possible we'll do a percentage of payroll tax and then other things. But we'd like to be able to get money to people. We're very lucky. Our country's doing so well. We can do this, and we can do it easily. But we have to do it. And I have to say, Mitch McConnell, if you look at Mitch and Kevin and the whole group, and it's been incredible how they're reacting, how Congress is reacting, how whether it's the House or Senate, how they're moving. And I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans, but we've had tremendous leadership meetings, and they want to see it done right. And they do want to go big. I think going big is important. I don't think we want to go up there every day with a different idea, a different concept. Oh, gee, let's worry about the airlines. Let's do this one. You have a big problem with the cruise ship industry. It's an industry that was setting all sorts of records 2 months ago. Then all of a sudden, there's nobody on the ships. Okay, so we have to help these. These are great industries. These are going to be taking care of people and passengers and for years to come, and paying tremendous taxes for years to come. So we have to make sure that this is done. Yes, John?
Mr. President, I want to bring up what you referred to just a short while ago about politics. In your address to the nation, you said we have to put politics aside, stop the partisanship, and unify together. This morning, you criticized the Democratic governor of Michigan. Yesterday, it was the Democratic governor of New York. You've attacked Obama. You've attacked Biden. In fact, every day except one since that address, you've lashed out at a Democratic leader. Are you going to set the example?
I only do that when I have to respond. I watched her on television. She said something that was false, and therefore I did do that. And I will continue to do that. If they're not going to play fair, because, they have the media on their side, I don't. I just have me. And if they're not going to play fair, I'm going to do that. If they are going to play fair, there's going to be nobody better than Donald Trump in terms of bipartisanship. But if they're going to say things that are false, like the story that was written yesterday, a lot of people, I don't know, somebody, I think I know who, but they taped the conference call that I had with the governors. It was a good call. It was fine. I assume somebody's going to tape it. They handed it to various people, and one of them was the New York Times, and the New York Times chose to write totally inaccurately about it. It was a disgraceful thing. It was bad journalism, but, they do a lot of bad journalism. But we respond to that, and actually, people get it. People get it. No, I want it to be bipartisan, and nobody's going to be better than me, but when they attack me or the people, these incredible people behind me, I'm not going to let them get away with it. I can't do that. Okay, how about one or two more questions? Go ahead, please.
Follow up on the 15-day guidelines was the next natural step. So is the next natural step after that a national lockdown similar to what San Francisco is doing?
Well, you can do a national lockdown. Hopefully we're not going to need that. We think of everything. I mean, we have every idea that you mentioned we've thought of, and, it's a very big step. That's a step that I mean, in one sense, would work. It's a very big step. It's something we talk about, but we haven't decided to do that. Please, go ahead.
Mr. President, what would be the determining factors for you to take that action?
It would have to get to a level. I just don't think it's going to be an action that we're going to take. I don't think I'll talk. But Anthony, all of the people standing behind me would get together in a room, plus some additionals, and we would make a decision. But I don't think that's a step that we're going to be taking. But one more question. You didn't have one, did you? Come on.
Will the U.S. government provide financial assistance to Boeing and airplane suppliers like GE?
We're looking at that. We're certainly looking at Boeing. Boeing got hit hard in many different ways. Boeing never had a problem for years. They were it was unthinkable what happened with respect to Boeing. Unthinkable. Probably, I would consider it the greatest company in the world prior to a year ago. Now they get hit in 15 different ways, and they have different management. I've met the new people running Boeing. I think it's going to be outstanding. But yeah, we have to protect Boeing. We have to absolutely help Boeing. They were doing a job. It was coming along well. And then all of a sudden this hits. So obviously when the airlines aren't doing well, Boeing's not going to be doing well. So we'll be helping Boeing, yeah.
Can you just respond to something, Mr. President, before you leave, on what John was saying? You've called for people to leave politics out of this. Joe Biden said the World Health Organization offered testing kits that they had available to the United States and to us now. We refused it. We didn't want to buy them. PolitiFact says the WHO never made that offer. Can you tell us?
Well, that's what I heard. I'm going to let Tony answer that question, or whoever's best at answering that. But I do have to say, when you talk about politics, I watched the debate. Not too exciting, but what they said about me, and we've done a great job. When you talk about not being bipartisan, what they said about me, and if you look at swine flu, the whole thing, and I guess it was 2009, and what they did and the mistakes they've made, they were terrible. They were horrific mistakes. 17,000 people died. And I'll be honest, they shouldn't be criticizing because we've done a fantastic job. The only thing we haven't done well is to get good press. We've done a fantastic job, but it hasn't been appreciated. Even the closing down of the borders, which had never been done, and not only did we close them, but we closed them early. The press doesn't like writing about it. So we've done a poor job on press relationships, and I guess I don't know who to blame for that. I don't know. Maybe I can blame ourselves for that. I will blame ourselves, but I think we've done a great job. I think we've done a poor job in terms of press relationship. But let me have somebody answer your question.
So I tried to cover this in the answer when I talked about quality of kits, and our quality analysis runs through the FDA. So all of these platforms, we have asked people to submit, and we've asked states to quality control. So, anybody could submit their test to us. We don't buy tests that haven't been quality controlled, and they show us the data. Either show us the data up front or show us the data after they've been running them. Because quality testing for our American people is paramount to us. It doesn't help to put out a test where 50% or 47% are false positive. Imagine what that would mean to the American people. Imagine their level of concern now and telling people that they're false positive. We take this same approach to HIV. Imagine telling someone they were positive to HIV and they weren't. So that is our bottom line, the customer, the American people first. And so any of these groups can submit their testing kits through our regulatory processes. But without that and without a plan, we are not going to accept tests that have not been studied by us.
Good answer. It's a good answer. Would you have something on that?
I'm just going to emphasize a little bit more on that. When I became involved in the testing world, I called as senior officials at the WHO as I could find to understand what the situation was. And as far as I can tell from sources that should know, no one ever offered a test that we refused.
That's what I heard too.
This is a research grade test, right? Research grade test that was never not approved, not submitted to the FDA. That was supplied in tens of thousands of quantities to 100 countries in the world. Okay, so I think there's a lot that people are saying about this that's just based on rumor and myth. Nothing was offered that we refused. It was a research test that was not approved. And again, there was a small number that we have greatly surpassed in a very short period of time.
So number one, nothing was offered. Number two, it was a bad test. Otherwise, it was wonderful. Listen, thank you very much. No, he made a mistake. I assume that he'll apologize. Thank you all very much. Thank you. We'll be back.
As President Trump, Vice President Pence, and the rest of the coronavirus team at the White House with an expansive briefing about the actions of the U.S. government against the coronavirus, clearly stepping up efforts there, talking about getting financial assistance to individuals, getting financial assistance to industries, so expansive press conference offering a lot of details, and we will cover that in the details throughout the day. Right now, let's get the latest from the news desk. Doug Prisner. Doug, what do you have for us?
Hey, we're looking at higher equity prices, Paul, after that dramatic sell-off yesterday. We have the Dow higher by about 3% right now. A couple of things at foot. First, let's begin with the Fed restarting an emergency lending facility as a way of helping U.S. companies borrow through the commercial paper market. The way this will work is that American corporates basically will issue their short-term IOUs as collateral for cash from the Fed. This is an approach that was used during the financial crisis, and it really comes after stresses appeared in the short-term funding market and front-end credit market. Now, we're talking about a range anywhere between 30 to 90 days, and as a matter of insurance, or at least backstop, the U.S. Treasury is providing $10 billion in credit protection from its exchange stabilization fund. Already today, we're hearing about companies like Kraft Heinz, Caesars, and MGM drawing down their credit lines. Now, in terms of additional government support, you heard President Trump there saying we're going to go big on virus relief money. The administration has asked Congress for roughly $850 billion to combat the negative impact. A third attempt at juicing government spending. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin was saying the entire package in detail will be laid out later today. But one of the things that we're hearing now, vis-a-vis that press conference, the administration wants checks to individuals here in the U.S. to be larger than $1,000, and payments to the IRS can be delayed. Also, with respect to markets, Mnuchin absolutely believing in the notion of that markets must remain open, although the caveat here is that hours could be shortened if necessary. Furthermore, that banks will remain open as well. Speaking of banks, we have a little bit of relief as a result of higher long-term interest rates today. The 10-year Treasury picking up about 17 basis points right now. We are trading at 88 basis points on the 10-year. In the broader market, we have utilities leading the S&P 500 higher by 4.3%. NASDAQ Composite right now better by about 4.4%. Hearing about Boeing during that press conference. Earlier, the company's stock traded to the lowest level in more than 6 years, battered by a severely negative outlook for the entire airline industry. Right now, Boeing shares down about 7.8%. The company and the airlines it supplies collectively pushing for about $58 billion in aid from the government. That's a quick look at markets. Paul, to you.
Doug Prisner, thank you so much for that. We appreciate a lot going on in the marketplace every day, it seems like, and Doug's helping us keep up to date on that. Markets here, we're getting the green on the screen, bouncing back. We were limit up earlier in the morning, gave back some of the gains, trying to hold some gains here in the equity markets here with the S&P up about 4.2% and the Dow up 3.1%. To get a sense of what we can think about in the coming days and weeks, we turn to Mark Doman, CEO and managing member of the Doman Group. Mark, thanks so much for joining us on the phone. Just give us your thoughts, your perspective on what we're seeing in the markets today and over the last couple of weeks.
Well, thank you for having me on, Paul. It's good to talk to you. Obviously, these are historic times. Truth is that if you look at the big bailout from 2008, that was $700 billion, and based on the news just now, that was another $850 billion, which is the third time the government is trying to attempt to stabilize our markets. The truth of it is that we've been anticipating an economic slowdown here at this company, the Doman Group, for the last 2 years. Our clients are primarily high net worth, younger people, executives, entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers. And because of that long investment horizon, we've been planning for a recessionary environment by owning, honestly, more high quality fixed income and maintaining higher cash positions than we typically would since early 2018. So as a result, a lot of clients are pretty excited about the position we're in, although it is obviously a nerve-wracking time for most of the markets.
So, Mark, it's interesting. I think a lot of people are starting to, looking at the markets and getting a sense of what level of panic is there in the markets. Some people look at volume. Some people look at the volatility. What is your sense of kind of what you're hearing from your clients and maybe what you're seeing in the market based upon your experience? Is this an orderly kind of reflection of a new risk level in the marketplace, or does this feel panicky to you?
It certainly feels more panicky than anything else. And while the global pandemic is very concerning from a health perspective, the global economic scenario that we're in now, there's really not an exact analog for it. As a result, clients are calling pretty regularly, but much to my pleasure, they're calling with the excitement that we've been sitting on a lot of cash, that we locked in high credit quality bonds, in the last few years. So we're in a position where clients are really calling in saying, hey, I'm hearing there's a panic, but what's our strategy? And ultimately, a lot of folks are asking, are we ready to buy yet?
And what's your answer there? Are you ready to buy here, or is this just waiting to get a better sense of a bottom here?
Well, the answer is a little bit of both, right? I mean, when we see companies that are trading at 30, 40, 50% off of their all-time highs or their 52-week highs even, companies with strong balance sheets that pay a nice dividend yield, we're looking at taking nibbles at certain sectors and certain specific names. At the same time, I'm also cautioning folks that right now, we just don't know where the bottom is yet. We don't know. We need to see infection rates slow. We need to see imminent action from Congress, which we're hoping to hear any day now. We're also hoping to get some more evidence about a slowdown with the infection rate in China. All of these things can really help us better understand what the bottom might look like and where that might be.
All right. So to the extent that we do get to that point, and presumably we'll get to that point at some point in the near, not too distant future, what are some of the sectors that you are looking at? I mean, you could look at some of the ones that are really beaten down, whether it be the travel or the airlines, but are there some certain sectors that once you do start buying, they're going to be kind of on the top of your to-do list?
Yes, I mean, while we're certainly being, we're trying to step back from the more impacted sectors like energy. We are very focused on companies that are dividend payers with solid balance sheets, where we know that they can sustain their payouts and ideally avoid any sort of bankruptcy or liquidity issues over the next 6 to 18 months. Some of those sectors, as examples, we're looking at very specific parts of manufacturing, semiconductors, discretionary companies that might have been overly penalized by this market panic. And ultimately, as you mentioned, the travel and airlines, a lot of these sectors are going to have a long slog ahead, but we do think that there's immense long-term value out there.
What do you think, Mark, about, one of the groups that's really been battered has been the financial stocks here? And granted, I think people feel like the banks are much, much better shape they are than they were going into the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Are the banks attractive to you here?
You know what? Not yet. They are very attractive, on their face, but we need to understand a little bit better about what's going on, in the credit markets, specifically in the repo world, to better understand what the long-term horizon looks like for these banks past the next 6 to 18 months. We really focus on long-term value here, again, because our clients are very wealthy at a very young age. So our goal is to try to find the right opportunities, whether it be the financial sector or the others we've discussed.
How about it's interesting, the technology, has been the leader for this market really over the last dozen years or so. A lot of tech names getting pulled down, but a lot of tech names doing a little bit better than the market. How do you feel about some of the broad tech sectors?
Well, gosh, I mean, we've seen the FANG stocks certainly help drive the market up to its all-time highs as a major component of that growth. And conversely, as they've been penalized during this market turmoil, they've become more attractive. With that said, we're still trying to, again, figure out how this economic slowdown on a global basis will impact those tech companies. We do think there is real value out there in some of those names. The key thing is just to let, the fog of war settle a bit with the global economy.
Mark Doman, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Mark Doman is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Member of the Doman Group, giving us I would say a more optimistic view of the markets here, kind of sensing some value, and then, kind of going to have to pick your spots. But I think here Mark was certainly more bullish, more upbeat. Again, might be his client list, kind of older, younger, and so therefore has a little bit more of a longer term horizon here. But we're starting to see a little bit of improvement in the markets today. Again, we had that limit up in the morning in the futures, if you remember, all the way back to pre-market, and then we had kind of some choppy trading since then. So really interesting here. So we'll have to see. We have the S&P up 3%, 75 points. Dow up 2%, 426 points on the Dow. The Nasdaq up 3.3% right now. The Nasdaq's at 7,128. So making a move there, trying to hold those gains for the day. It would be a welcome gain. Again, we've had some good news out of Washington in the sense that it really seems that the administration is taking a much bigger, much more aggressive view of this corona crisis here. And so we're starting to see that a little bit coming out of Washington. I think the markets are taking some good news right there. So just to finish up there, so looking at the 10-year Treasury, that's down 1 in 1930 seconds, pushing that 10-year yield up slightly, about 16 basis points right now. So we're getting a little bit of a lift in the yields out there, which is also a good news for the market. Looking at crude oil, still trading down, though. Still trading down about 3%. So a very difficult issue for them as well. So right now, let's go to Nicholas Diamond. Nicholas Diamond joins us on the phone. We really appreciate Nicholas giving us some time. He's a consultant working in health policy at the firm Avalier Health teaches and also teaches health on the faculty of Georgetown Law School. So, Nicholas, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time here. Just trying to get a sense here of, I think the administration and local and state governments are really trying to get a sense on how you stop the spread of the coronavirus. From a legal perspective, how far do you think governments can go in terms of maybe even considering something as draconian as martial law?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. We are seeing a lot of movement here really since Friday when the president declared a national emergency. And we've seen as recent as Sunday, now all 50 states and several localities like cities have also declared emergencies as well. And so I think they will be looking at pretty much all options available to help push back on this pandemic.
So, I mean, it's interesting here. I mean, do you think it's going to really require local communities really to drive this process in terms of, maybe locking down, restaurants and schools, and or is it more of a federal type of thing? What do you think will be most effective?
I think we're going to see activity from both. Historically, when we have epidemics or even pandemics, local authorities really play a strong role in the response efforts, and we're seeing a lot of that now. A lot of restrictions, let's say, on going to restaurants, like you mentioned, restrictions on going to movie theaters and social gatherings of a certain size. But I think these things generally go best when the federal and state and local authorities are all working in concert.
So it's interesting. We've seen some states be more aggressive than others. We saw just today, well, really starting yesterday, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut really coordinate amongst themselves as kind of a tri-state group. Some states, however, I guess where they haven't had as many cases, maybe not so much. Do you suspect that most states will probably try to ramp up as the cases ramp up there?
I think so. My general thoughts are we'll see a lot of individual activities by states and individual cities. I think the sort of that tri-state combination you referenced there really makes good sense when we look at just the epidemiology and the interconnectedness from a travel standpoint of that particular grouping of states. But I think generally speaking, we'll see a lot of individual movements, and we saw with Washington, for example, moving early, and several other states now, I think, as it's starting to become more of an issue for their population, will also be acting.
Interesting. So one of the things, Nicholas, is social distancing. It's a term I don't think we had in our vernacular more than a week ago. Right. So now it's on the tip of everybody's tongues. Everybody's practicing at the varying degrees. What happens if people don't practice social distancing? Are they liable for anything here? I just saw some news just some tape last night. South Padre Island, which is down in the south of Texas, full of spring breakers, just tens of thousands kind of crammed together, on the beaches and boardwalks, and that doesn't seem to be very good social distancing. So what's the liability individuals may face, if any?
Yeah, this is a question that, I think we probably won't get our arms around fully for a couple weeks. At the moment, we've just seen voluntary recommendations made around social distancing. So this has come from the CDC, other parts of the government, and then increasingly from state and local authorities. So there's really technically no legal liability involved if you're violating those, like those folks on the beach down in Texas. Remains to be seen whether we'll see stronger measures in the near term, in which case there could be some liability concerns to consider there.
So, Professor, I saw that the Supreme Court actually taking a pause here. How rare or common is that?
Yeah, this was a little surprising to me, too. I think it is generally pretty rare. We're also seeing even some state and local courts also hitting the pause button, and we're seeing some inconsistencies there, still some in-person involvement, but I think we're seeing on the whole pretty much all courts at all levels starting to at least strongly consider moving to more of a virtual platform, which really aligns with how other stakeholders are thinking about things at the moment.
What kind of risk does that, or I think if I'm a defense lawyer, that would be something positively, possibly positive, but how do you think the courts will deal with that?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to do, and I think we're seeing stakeholders across the spectrum as we're, for example, moving towards more of a remote working situation. I think wrestle with some of the same considerations, but particularly if we're thinking of criminal law cases, you want individuals to be able to present their cases, be present, the lawyers to be present as well. And so I think when we think about the platforms that will enable that, I think we'll see courts increasingly focus on what are the technology-enabled platforms that can advance that.
Got it. Nicholas Diamond, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your perspective. Nicholas is a consultant working in the health policy at the firm Avalier, giving us some thoughts on what's going on the legal front here as governments try to enforce coronavirus restrictions, social distancing, and the like as they try to contain the virus. Right now, let's get a sense of what's going on in the markets. Again, we had markets kind of trading up here, still holding their gains. Kriti Gupta, who follows the markets for Bloomberg News, joins us. So, Kriti, it seems like we're trying to hold on to these gains here pretty successfully.
Well, sort of. Yes and no. Yes, that we are still up on the day. Up, with S&P up, I'm just looking at it, 1.5% higher on the day. But remember, we were up as high as 6%, even 7% going into that presser. And from the president, we did see Steve Mnuchin saying that direct payments could come in 2 weeks. The Trump saying that it would be more than $1,000 in direct payments for Americans. All good signs and something that the market really liked as that conference was happening. But then we saw some pairing of gains to because eventually, at the end of the day, 2 weeks is not 2 minutes. So you did see some pairing of the gains here, but starting to see a little bit of a bounce off those, I said, some of those losses. Something to note here, though, is that the smaller the bounce is, remember, we did have a massive sell-off yesterday. The smaller the bounce is today, the better chance we have of going into another day of stocks in the green. So this is actually a good sign that the S&P is only up 1.4%. Now, if only we could end the day this way.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I know traders look at is kind of how the market trades into the close, into that last half hour. How has that been over the last several days? It just doesn't seem to be, seeing anybody want to take any overnight risk.
That's right. And you really see kind of that buying or that selling happen in the last hour, like you mentioned, specifically in those last 30 minutes. And I'm going to kind of rewind here. When we started to see these volatility and these virus headlines come out, 2 weeks ago, and we did see those massive kind of sell-offs, a week of just nonstop selling. Something to note there is there was a bit of a rally, a bit of the buying, those healthcare stocks that are working on these vaccines in the last hour of trading. Even we saw people going into tech in the last hour of trading. Something to notice now that we've had these press conferences, they happen to happen in the last 30 minutes of trading, which actually there's a rule that you can't have trading halts to the downside in the last 30 minutes of trading. So some interesting timing there, something to certainly watch. But yes, we do all kind of perk up when 3 o'clock hits to see how we're going to end the day.
Exactly. One of the things that we're also been focusing on, because we just can't avoid it, is the extreme volatility, the swings in the marketplace. I'm looking at the VIX right now, Curdy, which I know you look at. I know Tom Keene looks at. It's one of the first things he quotes every day. Giving back a little bit, but still, it's 77. I remember the days not too long ago when it was 12, 13, 14 on the VIX. Now we're looking at 77.
That's right. And I believe we had a record 83 yesterday. Don't quote me on that. I believe that was the number. A lot of kind of the fear that's happening here is not just volatility. We see spikes in volatility from time to time. It's the steepness of it. And I believe John Farrow has talked about this quite a bit as well. It's the speed at which we see spreads blowing out. It's the speed at which we're seeing the sell-offs happen. And that's really what's adding to the panic. It's not the volatility just in itself.
Are you one of those people that thinks that once this thing turns, it's going to turn big on the upside? Or do you think there's more psychological damage, if anything else, in the marketplace within investing community?
So morale is a big part of this, and then I think we have to kind of unpack it into two different ways. The first is kind of the government and the fiscal response, and the monetary, of course. Monetary easing is a big part of it, and you are actually seeing those in the intraday moves. You are seeing kind of a little bit of some buying on certain headlines that indicate that government institutions are stepping in. So that is one part of it. The other part is when you see a record sell-off, like yesterday, we saw, I believe, near 12% declines on the S&P yesterday, or headlines from last week, the biggest stock sell-off since 1987. That does add into kind of the morale. And that's why we're actually very skeptical, me and my colleagues on MLive, of whether this kind of gain that we're seeing in stocks right now is really going to hold into the close, like you were mentioning earlier, because a 2% gain on stocks is something we haven't seen in about a month here.
Yeah, just extraordinary times we're living in, extraordinary trading. Kriti Gupta, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your work, giving us your view on what's going on in the markets. Tremendous volatility. We try to stay with the markets as closely as we can to keep you updated with what's going on. Again, looking at the markets right here, the S&P is up about 3.4%, holding that gain. We were higher earlier in the day, as Kriti was mentioning, but again, a solid green across the screen. The S&P up 3, Dow up 2.2%, and the NASDAQ up 3.4%. Coming up, we're going to speak with Mark Hamrick, senior economist at Bankrate, to get a sense of what businesses really need in the marketplace. Is it cash right now? What other support do businesses in the markets need? We'll have that coming up on the remainder of Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are posting gains as the government steps up its efforts to offset the financial damage caused by the coronavirus. The Dow is up 3%, S&P 500 and NASDAQ both up 4%. The Federal Reserve has activated a program that allows it to bypass banks and lend money directly to companies. And Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says the White House is pushing to send checks of around $1,000 each directly to consumers within 2 weeks. But that may be easier said than done. The last time Americans received stimulus checks in 2009, there was a 2-month gap between congressional approval and the check mailings. Well, shares of Regeneron is surging today. The drug maker says it's identified antibodies that could help treat patients with the coronavirus. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
What if you could keep the top economic experts in a conference room next to your office without having to feed them?
Do we need better optics? Do we need some substance? Do CEOs care about ESG?
We have seen quite a lot of stimulus pumped into the system already.
It's the biggest warning yet about the financial risks of climate change.
Now there are more ways to hear us. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com and iHeartRadio apps, and at BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Sweet strawberry icing. You're in Goodwill, and just past that vintage denim jacket you spot miniature donut ear.
In the left passenger seat, we've got Dan the Widowmaker. In the right, Face Smash Steve. Oh, a solid left hook from Steve. Blocked by Dan. Dan's got him up against the ropes. Going for a signature pole driver slam. But Steve's wriggled away like a greasy snake. And Steve's got him in a chokehold. He's got him! He's got him!
Boys, pack it in back there. I'm trying to drive.
Sorry. Your mate's more likely to crash with passengers in the car. So don't drive him to distraction. Let a mate concentrate.
Petrol or electric? Why choose petrol and electric? Discover the BMW plug-in hybrid and electric range. Visit your BMW retailer. Sometimes electric, always BMW.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
Yeah, but you're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip,
yet.
you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
Like what you're listening to? Want to make getting back to it easier? Use the favorite button to keep track of the stations and podcasts you love on TuneIn. Just tap or click the heart icon to add it to your favorites. Then find all your go-to audio under the Favorites tab. Pretty easy, right?
Yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Adopt U.S. Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care would love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Have you ever thought, I wish I'd had that information sooner?
Talk to us about applications.
Let's fix that.
You own a number of brands.
Bloomberg Business Week, weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg Business Week, now live on YouTube. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Paul Paul Sweeney sitting in for David Weston today. Well, we're certainly hearing more and more coming out of Washington about fiscal stimulus. The question is, what do companies really need? We'll dig into that coming up first. But first, let's go to Doug Krisner, get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Doug, what do you have for us?
We got a couple of things, Paul. First, from the Bloomberg terminal, HSBC has named Noel Quinn as Group CEO. That's effective immediately. We're also hearing that the Fed and other banking regulators are reviewing several rules for banks to free up credit. Now, one easily achievable option would be to further delay the impact of a recent accounting rule change for current expected credit losses. Apparently, officials are also discussing some options on leverage limits. The day began with word that the Fed has restarted an emergency lending facility. This would help U.S. companies borrow through the commercial paper market. Now, the approach here was used back in the financial crisis. Basically, American corporates would use their short-term IOUs as collateral for cash. And basically, we're talking about short-term funding and front-end credit, 30 to 90-day range. And the Treasury, as a backstop, would provide about $10 billion worth of credit protection. Right now, we're seeing Dow Industrial Average up about 2.9%, but off the best level of the day here. In the broader market, we have the S&P 500 better by 3.9%. NASDAQ Composite is ahead 3.9% as well. Looking at shares of Boeing, they are trading down by about 6%. During the press conference, President Trump was talking about relief for the airline industry. He said that it was imperative. Now, Boeing, we are told, and officials not only at Boeing but the airlines writ large are looking for $58 billion in aid from the government. Yesterday, you might recall President Trump backing the industry 100%. Meantime, the crisis is costing the U.S. hotel industry about $1.4 billion a week. Marriott International saying that it has begun to furlough what it expects to be tens of thousands of employees as the company ramps up hotel closures across the globe. Marriott shares right now down about 0.5%. In the Treasury market, we've got a move higher for long-term rates with the 10-year adding about 15 basis points. We're at 87 basis points in yield. Crude oil right now down 1.5%, trading $28.30 a barrel. The dollar right now rallying against the majors with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up 1.5%. We've got a weaker yen here at 107.33 against the greenback, and the euro tanking by about 1.9% against the dollar at 109. That's $1.0974. You're caught up on markets. Let's get back to Balance of Power. Paul Sweeney.
Doug Krisner, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Boy, that euro really extraordinary, down 1.9%, trading at 1.09, just an extraordinary level on the euro. Well, we're certainly hearing more and more coming out of Washington just over the last several days about really ramping up fiscal stimulus as the coronavirus spreads across the U.S. and the U.S. economy. To get a sense of kind of how this might play out, we welcome Mark Hamrick. He's a senior economic analyst for Bankrate. He joins us on the phone. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time here. What do you think the economy is going to need in the weeks and months ahead in terms of fiscal stimulus? What do you think will be the most effective?
Well, I think, first of all, speed is of the essence, and it's not only important to be fast, but it's important to be close to right. There may be a lot of inefficiency associated with the process where, we think about essentially universal disbursement of $1,000 checks, so whether you need it or not, and I'm not undermining the idea, but there may be a lot of people getting checks who are going to be, basically fine throughout the process. But, as you heard in the update there, there are plenty of industries that are experiencing great stress right now. The travel industry at the top of the list, but now, there's an idea that the automakers may shut down for a couple of weeks. I understand some headlines coming in from the UAW on that. So, I think that this is similar to the financial crisis in that there are few parts of the economy that are unaffected. Doesn't mean that it needs to take down the entire economy, and I don't expect that it would. But it does mean that, finally we do see both the administration and the Federal Reserve seeming to be all hands on deck here, and that's welcome because it seems as if the Fed, had this in mind from the first day of the emergency rate cut, and the administration was still sort of spinning around, trying to determine, whether it was taking this seriously or not. And obviously, fiscal authorities, that's the piece that I think, in the discussions that I've been having with people now for, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks, even though a day seems like a week right now, so I might be off on that. But that was the missing part of this equation all along is, okay, now it's time to turn on the fire hose. It's time to make sure that small and mid-sized businesses have some access to funding of some kind, because, I'm trying to get my arms around the idea of what the economy does look like after we get through this. And obviously we will. But I do think that there may be, many substantial changes in the landscape, and it's hard to know exactly what those look like. But for example, if you think about something, and this is just a very, simple concept, we knew that retail was being transformed in a remarkable way already. You have to think, with the damage this is doing to brick and mortar, that that is only going to substantially accelerate. And I don't think there's any real recipe for resolving that, because, consumers aren't going to be shopping while they're sheltering in place here, other than obviously gravitating toward online. And, obviously Amazon's reaping a whirlwind of benefit there.
So, Mark, I think Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs this morning came out with, I think, Q2 really looking for about a 5% contraction in the U.S. economy. Is that something you subscribe to?
Well, I'm not doing the back-of-the-envelope calculation on that. They've got better qualified and smarter people to do that, but I do think we should be looking for a contraction, and the magnitude of it will only be known after the fact. We haven't even gotten a monthly employment report for the month of March yet, and that's going to be ugly, and then GDP is going to follow suit, and so the magnitude of the downturn is going to be significant, but I think that is almost going to be academic after the fact, because we have good reason to believe that, unlike 9/11 or the financial crisis, that there should be a pretty substantial resurgence once there is the virtual all clear sounded on this. And so, this will be a sharp and dramatic downturn, and I think obviously has already begun, because consumers and businesses have essentially shut it down, and exactly how ugly that looks, we'll only know that when we get into those numbers.
So, Mark, it's really been clear that the consumer's been the backbone of this U.S. economy, really, certainly in the later parts of this cycle. Any sense of how we should think about the consumer when we do come out the other end?
Yeah, well, I do think, first of all, that's why it's so incredibly important to address the issues of hourly workers here who, have already begun to suffer. When you see, headlines about restaurants not only closing for the short term, but some already closing for the long term. And those headlines have begun to emerge, and that's only going to accelerate because, they've essentially been cut off from their revenue. The online ordering or the delivery and takeout just isn't going to cut it. When you think about people ordering wine in, that's a big markup of item for them. But in terms of what it will look like on the other side, that's why I mentioned those hourly workers, because, they're a big part of our economy in the sense of just the population. If we can sort of stem the bleeding there, I think that's going to be important. But I do think that there will be kind of a virtual celebration, even if it's slow in ramping up, to the extent that consumers do want to get re-engaged with the economy and try to resume as safely as they can. And whether that's, going back to movie theaters, going back to live entertainment, sports venues, I think we'll all be looking forward to that.
I think you're absolutely right. Hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later. Mark Hamrick, thanks so much for joining us. Mark is a senior economic analyst for Bankrate, joining us on the phone, giving us some thoughts here on how this could play out in terms of fiscal stimulus, kind of who will benefit, who needs it the most. He called out, obviously, some of the leisure and travel companies. We've certainly seen big impacts on their businesses. Just take a look at the airlines, fewer flights flying, and fewer folks in those seats. So we'll certainly be following up on that. Coming up, we're going to chat with our good friend Yelena Shuletieva, Bloomberg senior U.S. economist, to get her thoughts on the economic outlook. Is it a V-shaped recovery, or is it going to be something longer? We'll talk to Yelena on that. This is Bloomberg.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at seic.com/seize change.
At the Bank of Santander, they've created Stan, a smart bot that can predict the future of remortgaging.
All right, Stan, will my mortgage rate go up?
1955 was the last time Newcastle won the cup.
No, and try not to mumble.
Playing, let's get ready to rumble.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they can't predict your future, but they'll help secure it with great mortgage rates fixed for up to 10 years. See what's possible at Santander.
Early repayment charges apply. Lending subject to status and criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
The Mona Lisa is only 30 inches tall. The world's hottest chili? 1 inch. And Napoleon? Taller than a Great Dane, but only by 71 centimetres. Who says small can't make an impact? The Peugeot 108 Allure is now available for just $159 per month, with $159 initial rental. Our small but mighty car that doesn't have to cost you a small fortune. Peugeot Motor Company PLC, a credit broker not a lender, will introduce you to PSA Finance UK Limited. Personal finance lease, 48 months at 159, 18 plus, guarantee may be required. Terms, eligibility and return conditions apply. You will not own the car.
Between game-winning shots and walk-off home runs.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Looking up, and this one is gone!
Follow TuneIn on social media to stay in the game. From live reminders of the biggest games in every league, to staff pick recommendations of our favorite sports shows and podcasts.
You're really greedy, Dak, but nobody's thinking that
Skip,
yet.
you know how these contracts work. All that 40 years for 5 years for $200 million.
Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to hear more sports.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
This week's On the Media, the president thought he could defeat the narrative of COVID-19 with his usual tactic of, quote, censorship through noise. But the virus is proving resistant.
People's lives are going to be disrupted on a daily basis, and as that happens, the alternate reality he's created is inevitably going to implode.
Catch On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Want to know a quick, easy way to see if your favorite podcasts have a new episode available? Just go to the home screen on your TuneIn app and see the latest editions under the Your New Episode section. Happy listening.
File a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
So we are seeing a recovery in U.S. equities after that dramatic sell-off yesterday. Right now, the Dow Industrial Average is up 3.5%. A couple of things afoot here, not the least of which the Fed reviewing, together with other banking regulators, several rules for banks as a way of freeing up credit. Now, one option would be to further delay the impact of a recent accounting rule change on current expected credit losses. Officials are also said to be discussing options on bank leverage limits. Now, we also know that the Fed has restarted an emergency lending facility as a way of helping U.S. companies tap some of the short-term credit markets, what's often referred to as the commercial paper market. The approach was used during the financial crisis. Already we know that big companies like Kraft Heinz, Caesars, and MGM have been drawing down their credit lines. Now, in terms of fiscal support, President Trump earlier today saying the government's going to go very big on virus relief. We are told the administration has asked Congress for $850 billion to combat the negative impact. Right now, we are seeing in the broader market, the S&P 500 better by 4.5%, NASDAQ Composite better by 4.8%. We've got a 10-year Treasury higher in yield by nearly 16 basis points. We are at 87 basis points now. We've got a rally in the dollar with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up by 1.5%, much weaker Japanese yen at 107.47, and a much weaker euro down nearly 1.9% against the dollar at $1.0976. That's markets. Let's get back to Paul Sweeney and the balance of power.
Doug Prisner, thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Paul Sweeney from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. You know, we had a real question now as we start to hear more and more out of Washington about fiscal stimulus to fight the impacts of the coronavirus. The question is, will it be effective? How long does it need to last? And will it keep the U.S. out of a recession? To get a sense of kind of the upcoming economic outlook, we welcome our good friend Yelena Shaletyeva from Bloomberg Economics. She joins us as she does very often to give us her thoughts. So, Yelena, we're starting to get some more rhetoric out of Washington. It looks like action is coming in terms of fiscal stimulus. What is Bloomberg's economic view of 2020? Are we looking for a recession at some point this year?
Good afternoon, Paul. So I think the time is now is of the essence. I think the fiscal authorities need to act really promptly. They cannot delay it any further. The Fed has done their job. Now it's in the fiscal authorities' court. So the longer they wait, the worse it will get. So basically our call for the economic outlook is predicated on whether fiscal authorities act and provide a fiscal stimulus or not. So if they do, our view is that we will be able to avoid the recession, although by a very thin margin. And again, a lot will depend on how aggressively and how quickly they act. Waiting to send the checks to households at some point during, the summer months will not help the economy that much. So in our view, a payroll tax holiday would be quite effective if it's instituted really quickly on both the employee and employer fronts.
So, Yelena, you're also seeing some industries going to be looking for bailouts. Do you expect that to be an important part of the government's response?
Well, yeah, and again, this is something that fiscal authorities, government have to deal with. The Fed cannot help certain particular companies, industries, and this is definitely the job of the government. So we'll definitely be helpful if they, speed up the response on that front. So, but speaking about the Fed, we just today they reinstated another financial crisis era tool. They already used back in 2008. They reinstated the commercial paper funding facility. The Fed sees its function as providing help to financial markets, making sure that financial markets are running smoothly. So they already cut rates by 100 basis points. Now they are making sure that credit is flowing freely to households and businesses. Expect more of the same. They will probably bring back some more crisis era tools.
So, Yelena, I know earlier today, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs coming out with a call for a contraction in GDP in the second quarter of 5%. Is that scenario reasonable in your opinion, and what has to kind of happen for that to occur?
I think it is very reasonable, and we are also assessing our forecast as we speak, actually. So if you look at the history and look at, for example, how bad the declines in personal consumption and business investment were during the financial crisis, you will see that minus 5% quarter-over-quarter negative growth rate is quite feasible. So that really compares to what we saw during the Great Recession. So the question, though, is whether it will be a prolonged downturn or not. It will really depend on the actions of the government. Again, the Fed did their job, and they acted very quickly, much quicker than during the financial crisis, because they do have the tools. They know what they are doing. So the question and really the action now is expected from the government and fiscal authorities.
Elena, how important is it for this to be a globally coordinated effort in terms of fiscal stimulus?
I think what is really important is the timing, and less so the broad coordination. After all different economies are at different stages in terms of monetary policy, fiscal policy, and etc. So they are confronting the virus outbreak. The best